So I'd like to go ahead and start the meeting. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let us call the meeting to order, please. Everyone would stand for the pledge of allegiance.
As you call to order and roll call, we should address the members.
We pledge first? No. Okay. Sorry, everybody. False alarm. We have one member that is not able to participate in person today, so this we will call vote. Start with the members that are present. Ms. Donahue? Signify present or aye. Mr. Newsom? Here. Mr. Harris?
There.
This is Christine Smith. I'm also in attendance. Mr. Frazier, are you with us?
Yes, I am, electronically.
All right, well, we have a few things we have to walk through for electronic meeting purpose. There's reasons to cite if you are dialing into a meeting, and I was wondering if you would cite the reasons for your participation electronically today, please.
I wanted to use the personal matter. I don't feel bad, but my wife has been self-quarantining herself with her mom, and of course I've been in contact with her.
I don't want to ask
Not recently.
for too many personal reasons. I think that's more than sufficient as to the personal matter and being quarantine related. Could you identify for us all where you're calling from, please?
I'm at my home on at 446 Payable Road, Amesville, Virginia.
And you're dialing in via the Zoom platform, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Mr. Goff, is that everything we need to put someone through electronically?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Sorry for getting wrapped up, everybody. It's so nice to see you in person again. If everyone could stand, please, for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If we could have a moment of silence, please. Thank you, everyone. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion regarding the adoption of the agenda?
Madam Chair, Chair Winston, so
Thank you. And that's to adopt the agenda as it exists without the adoption. Is that correct?
yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. I will conduct all votes today via roll call votes since one of our participants is dialed electronically. So please signify aye or nay when I'm calling your name. Ms. Donahue? Aye. Mr. Woodson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you. That takes us to the first item on the agenda, the school report with the superintendent. Thank you, Dr. Beverly.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Excellent.
Thank you.
It's so great to see everybody in person again. And I hope that everyone's staying healthy, and we trust you have safe and fun July 4th weekend. Our CPS has been bustling with activity behind the scenes as we have 9 reopening teams wrapping up their research and reporting this week so that we can make a final recommendation to the school board at the next Tuesday meeting. Our 9 teams are compiling research, best practices, health guidance, and parent feedback to make their recommendations for the following facets of our school reopening plan: space utilization and scheduling for instruction, social emotional supports for students and staff, connectivity and remote learning resources, human resources policies and implications, transportation and bus routing, health and safety mitigation, instructional delivery and staff development, meals and feeding programs, athletics and activities. Regardless of what attendance model is chosen, our CPS is still ultimately responsible for educating students with the best possible academic and social and emotional learning outcomes in mind. Here, with health and safety as a priority and focus moving forward, minimizing risk as much as possible. So to that end, our reopening plan will be presented to the school board for consideration next week, where board members will then consider the plan further in work sessions following the meeting. We look forward to finishing this very important work, fully realizing that we may have to go back to the drawing board and revamp and pivot and launch up the guidance and health officials as we learn more about this ever-evolving situation. We were very pleased to resume some segments of sporting activities for students in a modified format during phase 2, beginning on June 15th, which we have now has now shifted from simple conditioning workouts to some allowable practices and contests. We are still awaiting more information to be released from the Virginia High School League regarding the expectations for fall sports. Summer camps began this week. There was an incredible collaboration between RCPS, ESS, CFB, Mental Health Association Club here, with Welch at the Park, the Headwaters Foundation, the Northern Piedmont Community Foundation, Vegas Foundation, Family Futures, who literally organized an entire summer program at 3 different locations for the entire month of July in just a couple of weeks. These groups raised over $35,000 to be sure children had some fun summer activities while also giving parents some respite after the long extended school closures. We could not be more proud of this kind of community collaboration and hope to put up some beautiful photos of kids having fun in the sun very soon. If you've driven by the high school on 211 this week, I hope you've seen the beautiful smiling faces of the class of 2020. We are thrilled to be able to hold our graduation ceremony this Saturday, starting at 7. Although the ceremony is limited to graduates, their families, some staff, and special guests, and comply with the governor's executive order on community gatherings, media will be live streaming the event for those who wish to join the celebration online. The format will be a physically distanced outdoor driving style event where all speakers will need to wear masks and remain in or at their vehicle unless called to the stage. Thanks to the generosity of the CAP Foundation, candid and family photos will be provided for all graduates and their families. Thank you so much for all the support and encouragement you have shown in our class of 2020. I know they have truly appreciated being lifted up by their community during this difficult time. Finally, thank you again for your consideration of the CARES Act request. The seemingly insurmountable task of reopening schools safely does not come without added expenses. We are so grateful that you have given your public school system high priority in its work delivering essential services to students and families of Rappahannock County. Even still, our meals program is going throughout the summer, and the staff has been just incredible. Over 1,000 meals a week being sent out to families. Without your support, we would not be able to do this. We have not continued to do to help our families get through this challenge. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions for me?
My only question after Brimsley, my primary question is, well, first of all, thank you for managing fall graduation. I think that's going to be so great for the community and students who are yearning for some closure after a difficult end of the year. So thank you for putting all that together. I know many of us will be there. You mentioned bus routes. You mentioned it earlier that you probably have to sometimes stay with bus routes or something. Modified schedule you ultimately adopt. And my question is, do you have a handle for getting on what additional costs can be associated with modified bus routes? And then, as a second part, you don't have to identify amounts, but I was just curious, thinking about CARES Act funding and additional expenses incurred as part of your attempted reopening. What other big ticket items besides modified bus routes come to mind?
Well, some in my recent letter requesting for FY21 are going to be smaller, easily handled Google devices for children to limit the amount of time that you have devices shooting and food hardware services in the school. So, and that helps us be able to make sure every kid has what they need. Another one is the seating in the auditorium. We have some larger sections that we hope want to deny in their academic schedule when they're larger, but having that kind of a space that is already slated in our capital improvement plan in FY22 to be done anywhere. But this would align very well with being able to provide a reduced learning environment for larger sections and be able to visit the distance as well as added value of being a community asset as well. So we have that question here as well.
Thank you, Dr. Brennan. If anybody has anything else, we really do appreciate it, and I'm so looking forward to graduation on Friday. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Managed public comment time. Can I have a show of hands of people that might want to participate in the public comment period? Would you repeat that? Could I have a show of hands of people that would like to participate in public comment, please? Actually, I'll be hands. For public comment today, if you could come to the mic, please, when I call you, and also identify yourself by name and the district in which you reside. Direct your comments to the board and keep your comments to about 3 minutes. We should be all set. Please let me know if you have any questions. Anita, I think you had your hand up.
It's good to see you all. All of you. Especially we seem to have good crowd today, so that's a nice plus. Even though I did mostly home, I have to do business in 3 different counties, so I do a lot of driving and also doing a lot of business all over the place in various ways. And I've been in 4 different counties in the last month for something else.
Everybody in Northern Virginia, I will say, have been using their masks and have gone into businesses where there's big signs and warnings and telling people how many can be in the building, et cetera, et cetera. Further out here, I have seen less of that. In some cases, a lot less than that. And I would be curious to know if our health department here in Rappahannock County has been handing out any warnings, or any closing any place down because of that. And I haven't seen anything about it, so I'm very curious to know, and I'm asking a question that can't have an answer right now, but I believe that everybody should be aware that there are a lot of people not paying attention. If you look around the country, the places where they haven't been paying attention, the numbers go up of people who get sick. So anyway, thank you very much. And Anita Ramos, Hampton District, sorry.
Thank you, Anita. Ms. Freeman, I think you had your hand up.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Freeman. I just want you to know a little bit about me, and the reason that I do is because I'm applying for the social service position on the board that's open, and I think it's important that you know a little bit about me if you do not. I was born and raised here in Rappahannock County. I graduated from the school out here. All of my employment has been here in Rappahannock County, with the most recent more than 31 years serving at the Rappahannock County Social Service Department. I continue to maintain every one of my evaluations from my employment. That includes when I worked for the school system and for the social services. And if any of you would like to see those, I'll be more than happy to share them with you. I think you would be pleasantly surprised. I'd like to hope you would. In any case, I want you to know the reason that I am applying. Not only have I worked in the social service department in the school, I have volunteered at the free clinic when it was incorporated here in Rappahannock County under the auspices of the Foia department for over 10 years. In addition to that, I worked with the senior citizens in helping to raise funds for them for more than 3 years. I have been a Sunday school teacher for more than 13 years. I'm not now, but I was. My husband has retired from preaching. But in any case, I am from the Piedmont District, and the Piedmont District has not been represented on that board for quite a few years. And so I think it's very important that there be a broad spectrum of representation in any town, any city, any county, any state. And the last reason that I am interested in that position is because I have a love for serving people. I know how to speak up, but more importantly, I know how to listen. And I think that's important. I have been married for 45 years. All of my children graduated from this school here, so I am vested in this county. And I wanted you to know just a little bit about me that may help you make your decision when you decide for your appointment for the Social Services Board. Do you have any questions for me?
I know you well.
Thank you.
Pardon me?
Thank you, Mrs. Freeman. I think when we get to that portion of the program, there would be an opportunity, if there's any additional questions at that time, that we could follow up.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Who else had a hand up, please? Ms. Ritter?
Hi, I'm Steph Ritter, and I'm from the Wakefield District, and I want to come in support of Gary Curry. You know, I think that I've had several dealings over the years with Gary, and he is a superb professional. He has integrity. He's researched every issue that comes up. He's committed to doing what's right for this county, and he knows the laws and the regulations that pertain to anything that he gives advice on. You know, with regard to the Planning Commission, his advice is correct. You know, he followed the direction of the state Foia, the state Foia officer, I guess, and he advised the Planning Commission pursuant to that. You know, honestly, the idea that you would have to phone David Connick and give specifics about your medical condition in order to attend a meeting by Zoom is utterly anathema, especially, I think, if you're a woman. So I think Mr. Connick misconstrued both the FOIA requirements and ignored any kind of requirements of HIPAA. Okay. There's no statutory requirement that a member state the exact nature of his or her disability in order to attend a meeting by Zoom. I guess Mr. Connick, having failed to notify those who wanted to attend by Zoom, created some policy during that hearing, but that's insufficient notice, among other things. Mr. Connick's behavior towards Mr. Curry is shameful. One of the things that Brenda Garten said about this county is that it was the most toxic county that she had ever worked in, and she had worked in several counties. And honestly, one of the reasons that it is the most toxic county is that Mr. Connick emanates toxicity. If you allow him to change your minds about the job that Gary Curry does, you are doing a real disservice to this county, because Gary Curry is the best thing we have going in this county, in addition to Shannon Grinsley. You know, so don't mess it up. You know, we had a hard time getting somebody who was this good, and we won't do it again. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ritter. Who else wishes to speak? Yes, Diane.
Hello. A couple of things I want to mention, and I'm not sure if it's something I could talk about later on or now, but
I just wanted to say quickly, it's Diane Bruce, Piedmont District.
Diane Bruce, Piedmont District. Used to be Hampton District. Now it's Piedmont. Thank you. Later on the agenda, you have an item about traffic calming in the village of Sperryville. and I don't know if we'll have an opportunity to speak at that time or not, so I'll do it now. I hope that you will consider adopting this resolution and forwarding it on and working with the state and with VDOT to get something going. I think we're beginning to see a real calamity in Sperryville, particularly because of traffic. I have seen, well, there's so much tractor-trailer traffic now, and I am wondering if that's not a GPS problem with tractor-trailers getting to the inner port or whatever it's called up in Front Royal. But that tractor-trailer traffic is coming up 231, coming into Sperryville on 522. I have seen them have to stop at the corner store and wait for all the traffic to clear that they're meeting, and then they pull way out in order to make that turn around Pete's house. So that's just one thing, and the speed on that part of the road is just phenomenal. I mean, the speed limit is 25, but it's terrible. There's also a problem on Main Street. So I hope that we can start working on this problem before Sperryville becomes a real calamity. Another thing I see on the agenda has to do with your building committee. And I don't know if there have been any studies done, but I recall about the time I retired, which was 10 years ago, there was a comprehensive study done. I don't know if you've had opportunity to look at that, have you? Okay, because that was fairly complete and extensive. I too support Nancy Freeman. I cannot imagine a better person than Nancy. I've known her most of my life. She and her husband are neighbors to our family home. I worked with Nancy all of those years that I worked in the county, so I fully support Nancy. I do not think you could do much better. I also support Gary Curry if he needs any support. I think he too is one of the best things to happen to us here. We are lucky to have him. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and I don't see it on the agenda, but I thought it had come from the Planning Commission where they had referred the illuminated sign at Amosville to this body with recommendation for approval.
That will be next month's agenda.
I'm sorry?
That will be on next month's agenda.
Okay. Well, I don't think there was ever a public hearing at the Planning Commission level for that. I think it came up at the last PC meeting where the 3 members were not present, or 2 of them were not present, and just came directly to the Board of Supervisors. I think, I may be mistaken, but I think there ought to be a public hearing at the Planning Commission level before you have to deal with it. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Diane.
Thank you, Diane. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Yes.
May I just ask a question? Catherine Mater, Fremont District. Will there be a time to talk when we talk about the Sperryville pond and traffic and the resolution?
No, there's not a public hearing on that, so that would fall under public comment. So now would be the time to say something if you had something to say about that.
Okay, may I say something?
Yes, of course.
Catherine Bader, Piedmont District. I happen to own property within the town limits of Sperryville in the Commercial Village Commercial District. I also own property in Piedmont District on 231. So my comment is, yes, I do believe something needs to be done about the traffic, especially the speed limit, but I also believe that's kind of the horse before the cart. You're getting a resolution and no one has talked to all the property owners. I, for one, am one of those property owners, and no one's talked to me about the resolution, nor have they talked to the people that I called on the phone. Many years ago, we had a gateway committee, and we talked to the residents in Sperryville about what they wanted for their village, because it's not just business, it is also residential. So I would like to see where the planning, just as Diane's talking about the planning there, I'd like to see more planning into a resolution with input from the residents in the village before it comes before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Anyone else wishing to speak? Diane, I'm going to let you have a second shot at the piñata. Yes, you may.
Thank you. In response to what Kim has just said, there is something called the Sperryville Community Alliance or something like that. And they send out emails and talk about getting together, and they have done that. And unfortunately, Kim, I'm afraid you must not be on their email list. They had a meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago about this particular resolution, but they have had other meetings to which the public is invited. I'm afraid that it just hasn't distributed itself throughout enough of the public, because if Kim didn't know about it, she should have. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, Kim?
I can honestly say I was not aware of that, nor were the 2 people that I spoke to last night that live in the area that I live in. And I asked several questions last night of people who were the members of the Sperryville Alliance, and no one can answer that question. So perhaps I'm asking the wrong people in Sperryville.
All right. And I think, Susan, you have your hand up. So let's hear from you, and then I think that will probably conclude public comment.
I'm Susan Huff, Piedmont District, and I am a member of the Sperryville Community Alliance, and I apologize if we haven't reached you. We have had a number of meetings. We had a large meeting last year that Christine came to. We invited everyone in Sperryville to attend, and I don't know how you weren't invited again. I apologize on our behalf. The meetings are open to the public. They're the first Monday of every month, and they're very boring. Our mission is safety of Sperryville. And there's actually our meeting got bumped to Tuesday, tomorrow. You're welcome to come to that because of the board meeting tonight. But if you'd like to speak with me afterwards, I don't mean to address her, but if she'd like to speak to me afterwards, she can. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And I will have some things to say about this when we get to this agenda item. And I am taking off my mask because I do most of the talking and I don't feel like people can hear me clearly. If there's a time when I'm quiet, I will certainly put it back on. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Thank you. Then that concludes the public comment portion. It takes us to consent agenda. We have items E1 and E2, the minutes for adoption and accounts payable. Does anyone have any concerns about the consent agenda items to where we need to separate those?
Madam Chair, Keir Whitson, representing the Hampton District. I don't want to break my streak, so if we could pull the accounts payable out of the consent agenda, I just have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Frazier, are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we were all on board still. So with that, and then adopting the items of the consent agenda separately, do I have a motion in regards to the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue, and do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. I will do a roll call vote for all of these. Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. That takes us to accounts payable. Did you want to discuss your question, Mr. Whitson, or would you, should we make our declarations
Yeah, I'll be
first?
very quickly.
Okay.
The July 6th check run is quite large compared to what I've seen in my short time on the board. I was just curious if Mr. Curry, perhaps on behalf of Ms. Nick, could just walk us through, I assume it's end of fiscal year one-offs that have run our payables up above $1 million in that check run. And then, so that's my general question. My specific question relates to the payment to U.S. Bank. If you could just walk us through that, or walk me through that. Sure. It was a payment, looks like two separate payable line items totaling $357,914.
The U.S. Bank payment, that's the debt service on the 2 outstanding bonds that are due by July 15th.
Okay.
So you're good to know that those are actually paid.
Yep.
Will be after you take this vote. And regarding the AP for the July check run, it is large. It's actually smaller than last year.
Right.
But it includes a number of annual and semi-annual and quarterly payments to include the debt service you just noted. It includes Q4 payment for the fire companies and the Q1 payment for the Fire and Rescue Association. That's $172,000. The debt service of $358,000. Many invoices for the new refuse equipment, not all of them. We still have a little bit left. The total $114,000. And a Q1 payment to the regional jail of $103,000. So just those are $747,000. Making up more than half of the AP for this month.
And given the misalignment between, this really gets to the heart of my question now that I'm on this board and I'm starting to see the flow of payables month to month. Does this in any way put us in a bad cash flow position vis-a-vis tax revenue largely coming in the latter part of the calendar year?
As you see during the treasurer's reports or in the treasurer's reports attached to the agenda, we track cash month to month, and I asked Ms. Nick when I came here to put together the graph that really shows clearly how our cash trends. It does peak right after real estate personal property taxes are due, and then it drops every month until we get back to that once a year hit. But our cash position this year is better than it has been in any other recent year. A big part of that is the fact that we're holding $640,000 of CARES Act money, but we're actually about $1 million ahead of where we were last year. So we're better than just the CARES Act money. So it's all good news.
So net, if you put CARES Act money aside, you're saying that our cash position is roughly $350,000 better than it was same time last year?
Correct. And while we've just finished June, there's a lot left to sort out between now and closing the books on fiscal year 20. And when we complete the audit, that's when we'll really know our position at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Does anyone have any other questions? I think at this time it would be appropriate for us to read into the record our disclosures. Ms. Donahue, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. Pursuant to the Code of Virginia, Section 2.2-3115.h, as a Board of Supervisor member, I may have a personal interest related to the approval of the accounts payable process that includes consideration of a payment to Walker Jones, which firm provides legal counsel related to the Bragg 1 case. The nature of my potential personal interest is the fact that the named firm is providing for my legal defense as a member of the Board of Supervisors. I certify that my involvement and action is as a group of 3 or more members of the Board of Supervisors which are affected by the transaction, and that I am able to participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you. Mr. Whitson?
Pursuant to the Code of Virginia, Section 2.23115.h, as a Board of Supervisors member, I may have a personal interest related to the approval of accounts payable that includes consideration of a payment to Walker Jones, which firm provides legal counsel related to the Bragg 1 case, the nature of my potential personal interest, and the fact that the named firm is providing for my legal defense as a member of the Board of Supervisors. I certify that my involvement and action is as a group of 3 or more members of the Board of Supervisors which are affected by the transaction, and that I'm able to participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you. Mr. Parrish?
Pursuant to the Code of Virginia, Section 2.23115H, as a Board of Supervisors member, I may have a personal interest related to the approval of the accounts payable process that includes consideration of a payment to Walker Jones, which firm provides legal counsel related to the Bragg 1 case. The nature of my potential personal interest is the fact that the named firm is providing for my legal defense as an individual and member of the Board of Supervisors. I certify that my involvement in action is as a group of 3 or more members of the Board of Supervisors which are affected by the transaction, and that I am able to participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Mr. Frazier?
As what I've done the last couple of months, I'll decline to read this because Walker Jones does not represent me as an individual or a board member.
Thank you,
They
Mr.
haven't communicated with the board for 4 months. I don't see how they could be representing us.
All right, and I will make the similar declaration that pursuant to the Code of Virginia, Section 2.2-3115H, as a Board of Supervisors member, I may have a personal interest related to the approval of the accounts payable process that includes consideration of a payment to Walker Jones, whose firm provides legal counsel related to the Bragg case. The nature of my potential personal interest is the fact that the named firm is providing for my legal defense as a member of the Board of Supervisors. I certify that my involvement in action is as a group of 3 or more members of the Board of Supervisors which are affected by the transaction, and that I am able to participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. And with that, do I have a motion in regards to accounts payable, please?
Madam Chair, I'll move that we accept the accounts payable as presented, including the multiple check runs that are identified in today's agenda.
Thank you. That was a motion by Mr. Whitson. Do I have a second, please?
And I'll second it, Mr. Parrish here.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Roll call vote. Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you, everyone. And the last 2 items on the consent agenda, we don't have a supplemental appropriation, nor do we have a contingency budget item this month, which takes us through agenda item F. We have no presentations, and that takes us to appointments. Item G1, the appointment to the Lord Fairfax Community College Board. Mr. Curry, if you would tee this off for us, please.
Yes. The board appointed Mike Winger to LFCC board a couple of years ago to fill the remaining term of an individual that had to resign. He is requested to be reappointed. He submitted his reappointment application. It's included in the packet and is certainly eligible for appointment.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Do I have a motion in regards to this appointment, please?
Madam Chair, Mr. Wenger resides in the Hampton-Bonnet District. I was duly impressed with his presentation back in March, and I think he's doing a fantastic job and seems very enthusiastic about his role. So I would move that we reappoint Mr. Wenger to the LFCC board.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Do I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Is there any additional discussion? The second was by Ms. Donahue, just so everyone's aware. I would just like to say that it has been really delightful to have Mr. Wenger serve on the LFCC board, and when I talked to him about serving in that position, I specifically requested that he come back and let us know what LFCC is up to, and he has done that on multiple occasions, for which I am very appreciative. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank him for doing that. And I wish we heard more of that and got more feedback from all of our appointees. If no one else has anything to say, I'd like to go ahead and call for the question. Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you. That takes us to the next agenda item, the appointment to the Rappahannock County Community Policy and Management Team. If you could set that up for us, please, Mr. Curry.
Yes, the Community Policy Management Team is the appointed group that controls the funding for the Children's Services Act. The Code of Virginia defines the different categories of appointees that must sit on this group. One of those is a representative from the Community Services Board. The Board of Supervisors previously appointed Ryan Banks, and she's done a great job on the CPMT. They're having a few staff transitions at the CSB, and the director is requested to change our representative to Taisha Chavez rather than Ryan Banks, and the executive director submitted an application to that end. It really is his request, but his option, but every appointee must be appointed by the Board of Supervisors, so you need to take this action to ratify the selection of the executive director.
Very good. Are there any questions, or do we have a motion in regards to this application?
I'll make a motion that we appoint the applicant, Teresa Chavez. Also want to say, just for a shout out for Ryan Banks, who's leaving. She was a great asset to the board. She was extremely intelligent. She had all kind of, experience in this field, and she'll be sorely missed. But yeah, I'll make a motion that we appoint the applicant, Teresa Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. And do I have a second? I'll second for ease. Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, the appointment to the EMS Council.
Yes, the Rappahannock Ems Counsel is a regional group that works with emergency medical service matters. The Board of Supervisors and the county have two representatives, Jack Atkins, whose term expires in June of 2021, and Donald Gore, who served for some time. His term expired on June 1, 2020, but was automatically held over by your continuity government ordinance. This is your opportunity to reappoint Mr. Gore, which he has requested, or appoint somebody else. I've attached to the agenda item Mr. Gore's application, as well as a letter from the council requesting that the board reappoint Mr. Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curry. Do I have a...
I'll make a motion to reappoint Donald Gore.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish, and I'll second that motion. Is there any further discussion? Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. That takes us to item 4, the appointment to the Library Board of Trustees due to resignation. Mr. Parrish? Or Mr. Curry, if you don't mind.
Sure. As the board's aware, I'm your county representative serving on the Library Board of Trustees. There are 9 total members. This is controlled by the county ordinance that sets the number. There was one member that had resigned because they moved out of the county. The board made a recent appointment, but the individual that was appointed decided he could help the library in different ways, and so he resigned fairly shortly after being appointed. This would be a short appointment period because it expires on 12/31/2020, after which a full appointment term could commence. You have 2 applications in the packet, one from Ruth Welch and one from Ms. DeSarno. And again, this appointment would be through 12/31/2020, unless I suppose the board could, if you wanted to extend that term for the short period and then a 4-year term beyond that if you wanted to.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. I see Ms. DeSarno is present. I don't see Ms. Welch. Is she here? Okay. So I'd like to give applicants an opportunity to speak. Did you have something that you'd like to say, Judy?
I'm Judy DeSarno, and from the Hampton District. I just want to say, which I said in my application, and I think you've seen, that I consider the library one of our treasures. And one of the things that I have been most impressed about this county, and particularly during the COVID-19 crisis, is how the many organizations have come together to work to address the needs of its organization. And I think there are a number of places that we could do more work with the library, whether it's working with the school system with children who do not have access to internet at home, working with Rapid Home to assure that we can get library books to, and I'm a volunteer with Rapid Home, to folks who can't either because of transportation or because of isolation get library books. But I think you have, I like to think I'm a good applicant, but I think you have two very good applicants. But I'd be honored to serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any motions or discussion in regards to these applications?
Madam Chair, Keir Whitson, Hampton District representative. We're very fortunate today, not only for this seat on the library board, but also the Social Services Board, where we have fantastic candidates, many of whom are well known to our community. I've had a discussion with Ms. DeSarno about her interest in serving on the library board. I think the library is in a very fortunate position of having funds provided to the library by a private citizen that could serve as a catalyst for significant capital improvements. And along those lines, I think it's important that we place someone on the board with keen fundraising ability and experience, and Ms. DeSarno certainly demonstrated that in her long service on the Headwaters Foundation Board. So for discussion or vote, I would move that we appoint Ms. DeSarno to the library board for the remainder of the unexpired term of the individual she's replacing, plus an additional 4-year period. And I also want to thank Ms. Welch for her application. She's equally a good applicant, as Ms. DeSarno stated.
Thank you. Do I have a second or any further discussion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Are you still with us, Mr. Frazier?
I'm sorry?
I just wanted to make sure you were still with us.
Yeah, yes, I
Okay.
am.
I know it's very challenging to try to have a discussion and patch in electronically, so I just want to make sure that if you had something to say, that you had an opportunity.
No, thank you very much, though.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Very good. Is there any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, we have a motion by Mr. Whitson and a second by Ms. Donahue. So I think we should go ahead and vote. Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I just also wanted to thank Mrs. Welch for her application. I've served with her on the RCRFA board, and she does a very fine job, and her talents are very well put to use in that capacity, and I appreciate all the hard work she brings to that organization.
Thank you. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you for your willingness to serve, Judy. Thank you. That takes us to the appointment to the Social Services Board, and I think both of the applicants are present for this position as well, and I did just want to give both applicants an opportunity to address the board in terms of this appointment this afternoon. Ms. Burleson?
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Burleson, and I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity to address the board today regarding the social services position. With all due respect to this process, I want to make it clear I'm not here to campaign for myself or against anybody else. I am here to meet all of you and to tell you a little bit about what I can bring to the table. The world has enough conflict right now, and I'm not interested in adding to it. I am a full-time Rappahannock County resident. I go by many titles: entrepreneur, I own my own woman-owned small business located in Flint Hill, philanthropist, wife, and probably the one that I'm most proud of is a mother. I have successfully raised and kicked out 2 children from my home, and I'm halfway there. I have also have a long history of volunteerism, both within the county and outside the county. I am passionate about helping our county's families and children. My husband and I have attended the foster care training. We have sponsored children at Christmas time and invited all the parents and children to our home last summer for a day at the pool. We had planned to do the same this year, but had to curtail that due to COVID. I am a businesswoman. I'm a certified public accountant, graduate from George Washington University with my MBA. Before starting my own CPA practice, I worked for a nationally recognized defense contractor running the finances of a $1 billion business unit. I have owned my own business and helped nonprofits and for-profits in this county for 10 years. Our family is passionate about family. We love Rappahannock County, and we care about the children and families who live here. I believe that my passions combined with strong business sense is the right combination that is needed for this position. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burleson. Ms. Freeman, did you want to add something to your earlier comments?
Not to add anything, but if anyone has any questions for me, whether they be personal, whether it be from employment, doesn't matter.
The members
if you'd like to know more about me.
Members of the board have any questions for the applicants?
I miss seeing you at the post office. It's been a while. Good to
Meet
see
you
you.
in Sperryville. Thank you.
I just really appreciate your willingness to put your name forward to serve, Mrs. Freeman. I really do appreciate everything that you bring to the table on this.
You know, I do want to say one thing. I come from an extremely poor family. And I just think everybody needs to be represented.
Thank you, Mrs. Freeman. Is there any discussion or motion in regards to these applications?
Well, I'll make a motion to appoint Ms. Burleson to this post.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Parrish to appoint Jessica Burleson to the Social Services Board. Do I have a second?
I'll second for discussion. This is a very important appointment, given all that's going on in the social services community right now.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. So I do think I want to hear some discussion about this. I mean, and I have a question as well, but I'd like to hear what the other members have to say.
So my opinion is based on the prospect of getting fresh blood into this system. And I know that that the other candidate offers a whole lot of experience, but sometimes it's just better to have fresh and younger people. This includes supervisors too. So that's the reason that's my thinking on this, is kind of a fresh entry into the system. But they both are obviously highly qualified, so it's really, either way, we can't lose.
Madam Chair, I'm in the fortunate or unfortunate position of knowing both applicants very well, and I know Nancy and her son Lee and husband Forrest, and I've known them for a long time, and they've been to my home. And my big question right now hinges on, and recognizing that at some point other seats will come available on this board. We have two excellent candidates. I know Ms. Burleson, I've known her since we both sat in the Kramer building in the town of Washington, and I know she runs a very successful personal and business accounting practice. Just looking at the handbook, the local board member handbook for the DSS board, the one thing that stands out to me in the context of all the revenue-related challenges we're facing in this COVID-19 crisis, one of many qualifications of an ideal board member would include background in accounting and budgeting experience, and certainly Ms. Burleson has spoken to that. And Ms. Freeman obviously has 3 decades of direct experience working as a practitioner in the department, directly related to the board seat for which she's applying. So for me, it's really a difficult decision, but given all that we've learned in the last few months about revenue challenges in the wake or in this ongoing COVID-19 crisis, I am concerned about how social services in the county will be affected and how social services will best manage the revenue available to them from the federal and state level. And I think having an accounting practitioner in that seat would perhaps get this board through what is likely to be a very, very challenging time as they try to provide good service to our community. Again, it's not an easy decision. I just put that out there for discussion.
I just would like to say that I think when you have someone that has 3 decades of experience in the most troubled or challenging time that I can think of, that would be the person that I would want to have on my team. I think that there's no substitute for the experience that Ms. Freeman brings to the table, and I thank both applicants for their interest. I think we do have an opportunity as a board, if we do want to dial into fiscal oversight, as it spells out in the attachment, that the Social Services Board must have at least 3 members. And so we can visit the county code and make additional appointments if we do see that that is necessary. We could take that on and have an additional appointment. I do think it is, and I know this is a different point of view than some of the other board members, I do think it is important to rotate the seats around districts and have kind of even-handed approach to board appointments in terms of where they originate from, which district that they represent. And I say with all respect to Ms. Burleson that I imagine that you took on foster care parent training to become a foster parent. And so to my mind, if you're in an oversight role on the board, I would want someone that wasn't involved in a program on the board. That's my personal preference, and perhaps I misunderstood. But that would be how I would prefer to operate. I would afraid that that might create conflicts of interest. Yes, ma'am, you're welcome to speak. Thank you. So if there's no further discussion, is there any further discussion? Yes, Ms. Freeman.
Right. 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 No. Yeah. No. It's important experience for sure.
Which involved calculations, which involved an eye or the possibility of fraud, which involved interviewing individuals, but which also involved making sure that I applied federal, state, and local policy.
Thank you, Mrs. Freeman. Mr. Frazier, did you have any questions?
No.
Thank you. Right, if there's no further discussion, we have a motion and second. Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
This is on.
This is
Burleson.
to appoint Jessica Burleson to the Social Services Board.
Yeah, it's a very, very, I'm in a quandary because we have 2 very qualified individuals. I'll say no.
And I say no also. Thank you both for your applications.
Thank you very much.
And I wish you much luck in your position. If there's no further discussion, we would move on to old business, draft zoning text amendments for Canneries. Are we turning this over to Ms. Summers today, or are you queuing this up for us, Gary?
I think that's me. As the board is aware, we've had discussions at previous meetings about how our zoning ordinance handles canneries. And this all came up related to the zoning changes that the owner of the old Eileen plant brought before the board because Virginia Chutney is locating there. And it became apparent that in a community such as ours, we really should have a zoning ordinance that supports this industry if we want to support our agricultural businesses. To that end, Mr. Goff pulled together some recommended changes to the ordinance, which are included in the attachment. He also authored an opinion letter, which is in as an attachment. And the changes are rather simple in that they add a definition for commercial cannery with a definition of any structure used to can food for wholesale or retail sale that is regulated for food safety by any state or federal agency. And then inserting into your zoning table in Chapter 170, Section 36G, under the agriculture, horticulture, forestry, and associated uses, a new row called commercial cannery, and identifying that it would be a special exception in the agriculture, commercial village, commercial general, industrial, and highway commercial zones, and they would require a site plan. And then lastly, adding a small section to a small additional verbiage in zoning section 170-70, which is the accessory uses and structures, to make it clear that a permitted accessory use includes gardening with additional words, and farm or home canning for personal use or for sale on a farm, farm store, or farm stand not regulated for food safety by any state or federal agency. So this would draw a clear distinction between those who are operating a farm, doing some canning for themselves, or selling at a small farm stand and aren't subject to the health department or a state agency or federal agency coming in and regulating, to a commercial cannery, which could be a large operation and should be regulated in some way. And so that probably will be regulated based on where the applicant is seeking to place it, what the adjacencies are, so it would make it appropriate to have a special exception. They would bring it to the Planning Commission, who would vet it, who would then make a recommendation to the board, and the board could approve or deny a special exception and include reasonable conditions based on that application and the size and scale of the request. So those changes are incorporated into a resolution that is prepared for you. The board could use to refer this matter to the Planning Commission as a request for them to consider this ordinance change. As we've discussed in the past, Code of Virginia Section 15.2, 2285B provides the opportunity for boards to refer matters to the Planning Commission and gives them 100 days to return their recommendation if they, after their first meeting that is scheduled after hearing it, after this meeting. And if they don't refer a recommendation back, the board could act, move forward and act and adopt this change. And if they do make a recommendation, I'm sure it would add to the information included in this, and the board could make a well-informed decision on a future ordinance amendment. Happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Mr. Goff would as well.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Are there any motions or discussion in regards to this agenda item?
Madam Chair, my recollection is that Mr. Frazier, when this came up, suggested we seek an opinion in a draft, if I remember correctly. I'd be interested to see if this meets sort of what he had envisioned at that time.
Should I address that?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Frazier, if you're prepared.
Yeah, I think that the Planning Commission should take this up as part of our zoning ordinance update. Mm-hmm. It certainly is a big hole that we have there. It doesn't really make sense that we have an agricultural community that we can't do value added processing to agricultural products. So I'm in favor of doing this. I'm not sure exactly what the rest of the commission will eventually come up with once the board sends it to them. But I think we should do it.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Is that then a motion to go ahead and send the attachments that are included in today's packet down to the Planning Commission?
So moved.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Is there any further discussion? All right, we have a motion from Mr. Frazier and a second by Mr. Parrish. Ms. Donahue? Aye. Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you very much. That takes us on to the Finance Committee Charter Resolution, and attached to that is the Rules Committee. And I'm afraid that puts it in your court also, Mr. Frazier. If you would be willing to speak to this, please.
You alerted me to this several days ago, and I'm still not quite properly prepared for it. But this is the Finance Committee is something that I thought that we should have had several years ago. We actually tried to bring it forward. The board did create one, but there was no desire by the board to participate in it. So it basically died. And I think it's very important that we join our colleagues in every adjoining locality around us and have something like this Finance Committee. We're moving into an area where we're going to need some long-range planning in financial areas.
Thank you, Mr.
And I think it's very appropriate to even mention this, but Mr. Parrish brought that up in social services. Social services is a part of the county budget. If we look for members who work there that have financial backgrounds, I don't know why the board would ignore it in our own area.
And I guess, Mr. Frazier, my question would be, are you looking to adopt this today, or do you want the Rules Committee to review it again?
I don't know that it needs any more review, but we certainly can. If the board has something that they want to look at, we can take it back and look at it. I believe the committee should be starting up this month. Rules Committee, Building Committee, etc. We would certainly take it up this month.
I would like for the Rules Committee to visit this and make sure it's structured in the best possible way and have buy-in from all the parties that would be involved in putting together the Finance Committee. And alternately, if there's other ways to approach this financial planning, I would be interested in hearing those also from the Rules Committee. And so I guess I'm making a motion that we would refer this matter to the Rules Committee for further discussion, and hoping to hear something back from them within 60 days. Which puts us on the trajectory to hit the end of the year, which is when we were thinking we would seat this committee regardless.
Right. But I'll second that.
Thank you. So I made the motion, Christine Smith, and that's a second from Mr. Frazier. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I really don't see a need for a finance committee. It seems to me to be redundant, and it could actually confuse the situation. We basically are the finance committee. We have a good team with Debbie Nick and Gary Curry, Lauren May, that do a lot of the research for this. And I think that it's quite possible that an extra committee would be a hindrance rather than an improvement or help. So Mr. Frazier knows I've had this feeling all along, and I still feel that way.
Are there any other thoughts on it?
Madam Chair, as I stated, I think at our January meeting, as a newcomer to this board, I'm still trying to, and obviously we've had the difficulty of not meeting in person for a few months, so I feel like we're kind of back where we started to some extent on this question. I have no problem having a finance committee. My question is, in a county our size of 7,000 people, a 5-member board, we're all very engaged on the financial side of county business. An alternative might be work sessions for the Board of Supervisors as opposed to a separate committee, because clearly with concerns about capital projects, including courthouse renovations or replacement and other big ticket items, I think we owe it to taxpayers to be discussing these things in as transparent and open forum as possible, because these are big matters coming down the pike, including wastewater treatment facilities as another matter. So I'm just thinking out loud conceptually. It might make sense if we approach this by way of initiating occasional work sessions to start talking about strategic planning vis-a-vis spending and capital projects. Just an idea.
And I certainly agree that we do need to undertake some work sessions for this and other topics that have been sort of in the wind for the last few months. I guess I don't really have a preference for an approach. I just feel like the work needs to be done. Mr. Curry, the first year that he joined us, by the time we got to the end of our budget, and he laid out our budget for us, you know, the big question mark was long-term planning, and there's a lot of work to do here.
Right.
And you know, are we 3 budget cycles in, Gary? And there's still a lot of work to do there. You know, if that's what needs to be done, I don't really have a preference as to how it gets done. I just want to do it. So if we're going to add some work sessions, then I think if you're all in favor of me starting to call work sessions, we had done on occasion some mid-month Monday evening work sessions. Would that suit everyone's schedule?
Generally speaking, I mean, I do think that as a new member of this board, one of the things that I wanted to do, if elected, and now I am on the board, is really start getting ahead of big problems before they become bigger and cost taxpayers more money. And I think, again, about our historic buildings on Courthouse Row as a starting point. So if we can start planning ahead in that regard, and we do it publicly by way of a work session, whatever the schedule, I think that's preferable than when compared to sort of a breakout committee that's perhaps not as accessible to the public. So I think it'd be a sound approach, and I'd be willing to participate.
Okay, so I will put myself to work to call those workshops, and I'll withdraw my second with the understanding that we're going to take this on, all 5 of us together in work sessions.
You or the motion?
I would definitely agree with that.
Oh, then I'll withdraw my motion. Mr. Frazier, did you want to continue to make that motion? I've withdrawn my motion with the understanding that we're going to do the work as a full board via work sessions.
Well, it really doesn't matter to me. I mean, I just thought it really, every other locality around us has one. They find different ways to make it work. It's really the board's preference. I mean, but the problem is, I think it's just easier with the finance committee to do some of the groundwork, some of the legwork to the full body.
And
I don't know. I honestly don't see how in the world we come up with this transparency thing, Mr. Whitson. I don't understand where that came from, but whatever.
I kind of have a feeling after a few work sessions, we may be ready to form a finance committee to carry on the work we establish in the work sessions. But I certainly understand if all 5 of us won't buy in at the beginning.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Parrish.
So I would like to point out that even though the other counties do have a finance committee, they are certainly no better off than we are. We basically have the same tax rate as all of our neighbors except for Fauquier. That's got they're 50% higher. And we have the highest composite index of anybody, so we're paying the biggest share for our schools of all our neighbors. And by the same token, they may have a few services that we don't have, but in general, we're covered, and we have all the services that are needed, and an excellent sheriff's department, and all of that. I think that Rappahannock County is a unique county, and I just think the way to keep it unique is not emulate our neighbors. I just wanted to say that. Good point.
Thank you,
One thing in closing, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Certainly, Mr. Parrish is correct there in his assessment, but every county around us has already went to paid EMS, and that's where we're headed. And that's going to take some money to do that. And, we rely on the goodness of the other counties around us for some of the public services that we do enjoy. We don't have a tower for our radio equipment in this county, and our deputies cannot even talk back from an area such as Rock Mills, where we already have a problem with people coming in from outside the county trespassing. So we have a situation where we rely heavily on other localities, and then we say we're different than they are. We're only different because they allow us to use their facilities, and that's not going to continue forever. So I think it's really it's not a good way to plan. It's actually the lack of planning that has got us into this position.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. I will circulate some work session dates, and we'll see what we can get set up to move this forward. That takes us to the sign ordinance enforcement review. Would you be able to cue that up for us, please, Mr. Curry?
Yes. The board has discussed this item on multiple occasions, and staff has informed the board on a number of potential sign issues in the community that were brought to light by a citizen concerned and sent a 20-page letter to the county. We're working through that. It's a complicated process, and each site needs to be reviewed independently. Records need to be reviewed going back in time, all the permits that have been issued for those properties, whether any special exceptions were issued or special use permits, what the zoning classification is, and it has to be very carefully compared to the zoning ordinance of the day when signs were put up. So that work is progressing. In addition to that, there was a discussion regarding how murals or public art should be handled. Should they be a type of sign regulated a certain way, or should they be excluded and be distinct from signs and not regulated by the zoning ordinance? I put together a recommendation resolution at the March 11, 2020 meeting, which is attached to this agenda item. And at that time, the board reviewed the recommendation and sought to put that off for a couple of months. Of course, COVID got in the way, and that brings it back today as for your consideration. The resolution is in the packet, and it is also a very simple ordinance change to the zoning ordinance that essentially defines the term public art within your zoning ordinance as any items expressing creative skill or imagination in a visual form, such as painting or sculpture, which are intended to beautify or provide aesthetic influences to public areas or areas which are visible from the public realm. And then under the current definition for signs in the zoning ordinance, adds item C that states the term signs does not include public art. So it defines what public art is and then says a sign is not that. This would have significant consequences. Public art, murals, could come in any form, in any shape, in any size, in any location. And they would not be regulated unless they treaded into the water becoming a sign, and that is a gray area that is very hard to legislate in words. And that's why the Local Government Attorneys Association developed the definition that I just read for public art, and it relies on the zoning setup that we have from the Code of Virginia to parse that out. So your zoning administrator would have to review situations, whether they pop up or somebody comes to her for advice on whether they need a permit for a sign or whether it's a public art. And then based on that decision, the individual could appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And if the individual didn't like the response they got from the Board of Zoning Appeals, they could appeal to the circuit court. And eventually, if there are controversial matters to paint the edges of what public art is, the courts would decide, rather than you legislate what they may be. Mr. Goff has done a lot of work on this as well, and certainly welcome him to provide any input or answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Mr. Goff, I did just want to ask, I think at the March 11th meeting, we also requested an opinion from you to identify relevant precedents related to murals and public art and the Reed v. Gilbert case. And if such a precedent is not available, to seek an opinion from the Commonwealth's Attorney General. And I was just wondering how that opinion was shaping up.
Madam Chair, point of order. Is there any way you could use a microphone? It's like, or I can't. Thank you.
We can move that one.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I spent basically a month of Sunday afternoon, reading all the appellate cases that have come since that Reed down. And I'm not so sure that on all fours with what our problem is. One of the issues is as far as the Attorney General opinion, the Code of Virginia requires me to set forth a fact pattern and then draw a legal conclusion and argue that case as a form of question. So I need to have facts before me before I can ask the Attorney General to opine. The opinion too is likely going to be along the lines of here's this ordinance, and does this run afoul of Reed in town? Well, I think the Attorney General is going to want an actual contested fact pattern before they're going to give us anything that's working. And sometimes you don't get what you ask for. So without, so no, I mean, you guys say this is the ordinance that we consider, and I suppose the general. I'm all one question is it constitutional? Well, you know, and how do we know as applied without a fact pattern? Is it possible really just to discern in the abstract what all that would be? I would need to have something like, okay, is this that's the question, is the Sperryville sign that currently exists under this definition of what public art is, does it fit into that? And that's a question that I can actually just take the need to give you a reasonable answer. I don't want to give you a 500-page dissertation on the First Amendment and all the how it intersects with the zone. But in order to answer that question, I'm afraid that's what we generate. Tell me what is complicated from a legal standpoint.
Does it make sense, I guess, to refer the resolution to the Planning Commission and ask them to do the work, and then have, when we're contemplating adopting something, then have a basis to request an opinion?
Is it going to be applied to a particular set of facts?
Okay.
You know, you can ask something in the abstract, but the Attorney General is not because law professor, they are seeking to actually make the issue of opinion, the AG's opposition to opinion, unless the legislature changes it, it's presumed to be law. So they don't go out and just act as general professor, go out and study the questions to abuse themselves. It's going to have to be an actual controversy that they're interested in deciding.
But I guess my question is, when we're asking them to apply that lens, when we request that opinion, we would be asking them to look through the lens of whatever we've drafted and crafting the opinion about a certain sign.
Yeah, we need to pick a sign.
We need to pick a sign and pick a set of rules we want to operate with. Right, or public art definition, and then make sure it all passes muster.
Right. Well, and even the Attorney General says that it does pass muster, that's not the end of the issue.
Correct.
Because the agreed person may be affected by Michelle's decision on what it is, we still have appellate review. They will still go to the courts. And the courts are not bound by the Attorney General and his opinion. So it can still wind up in the Supreme Court of the United States eventually if the applicant is still required. So even having the wisdom of the AG's office behind our orders, not going to insulate it from the challenge that it programs. I hope I'm making sense.
You are. Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Are there any other questions or discussion regarding this agenda item? Mr. Parrish?
So we did have a lot of artists here in the county, and it's possible that displays of public art may actually invite tourism a little bit, and it could be interesting, and of course it could backfire. So in the event that we pass something like this, in the event that it did backfire, we could rescind the ordinance and change it with the date. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, there's one little thing there, and I had this that just popped in my head said that. To the extent that something has been approved, then we might have a vested rights issue. Because once it's done and it's been, she says in a written letter, you don't need a permit for this because I find it as public art. Even though you may rescind this ordinance at a future date, it may not in any way affect what already is created and put in place while the ordinance is in effect.
So it says I can visualize public art murals on the side of a barn or whatever, but would this allow people to put up a separate? They would still be encumbered by the actual sign size, right? Public art.
Public art under this definition would not be confined to sign size.
Yeah, I think that it might be dangerous to allow people to put up a structure any size anywhere. That could be dangerous, but if it was on existing buildings or barns or whatever, I think that would be interesting and maybe some fun. That we could possibly review it a little more.
Did anybody else have any comments?
I apologize, I wasn't here on March 11th when you first held this. I tried to call in, I really did.
Thank you for trying.
I tried hard. So I'm glad to have a chance to say something about it. So, to me, it seems that it's a two-part process. One, get kind of the reaction of we're dealing with in fact, a specific fact pattern related to a mural in Sperryville that has been deemed public art. Doing some background reading, it seems that at least a starting definition for public art hinges on the concept of a non-commercial, well, basically something lacking any kind of commercial statement. And certainly that mural in Sperryville does not have a commercial statement. It's not promoting business, it's not promoting any particular company or shop or anything like that. So my thought was maybe we could take care of this with the proposed amendment ordinance, but then I feel like we still have something to cover. And to me, what that is some form of public art ordinance. Since we're now wrapped up in this discussion, let's get it right. And one idea that has been put out there in the community would be a public art ordinance that falls outside of the zoning ordinance, in which case we could try to work out definitions of non-commercial statements, et cetera, and then adopt this language today and be done with it, but with the additional task of crafting a public art ordinance that I believe, if it was outside the zoning ordinance, would be solely within this local governing body to determine and to refine. So just for discussion, and that's my thought, two-step process.
Thank you, Mr. Woodson. And just to be clear, I believe what we're entertaining is sending this down to the Planning Commission today. I don't think we're looking to adopt this resolution today.
Correct.
We're looking to refer it to the Planning Commission with the...
And the 100 days starts at their next scheduled meeting, is that correct?
Yeah, it's 100 days after the first meeting of the commission after the vote's been enacted to the commission.
Okay, so likely that would put it back on our quarter of November. Is there any further discussion?
I just would like to say I agree that to me this is a short-term fix where we really have, because we have some artists in the county, a lot of talented people and tourists. I'd like to see us do something more thorough that separates signs from murals, from art, and that the Planning Commission will take it and do that. I think that's the best route.
I just would add to that I mean, I think everybody knows how this got to the Planning Commission originally, that I brought it forward and asked that it be sent down, and we as a board sent it down immediately to the Planning Commission, at which point I was serving on the Planning Commission shortly after that, and it was assigned to one of the Planning Commission members. And during my year on the Planning Commission, that member didn't attempt to do any work with it. And unfortunately, the work languished, somewhat at the expense of the comprehensive plan, but the two could have moved through in tandem. And so the work has not been done. And I do think something needs to be done. So the way, and I don't like the strong arm tactic of sending something down to recall later, but I do think we need to send something down to get that work moving forward. Do I have a motion in regards to the resolution in the packet today?
Madam Chair, I'll go ahead and, Ron Fraser, I'll put in the form of a motion for discussion, further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Do I have a second? For purposes of discussion, I'll second.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Fraser.
Because, and it's entirely my fault because I'm here and y'all are there, but it's difficult for me to hear everything y'all said. So I don't know if this was stated, but under the definition that the board received from the Local Government Attorneys Association, the Sperryville sign is a sign. Under those definitions, it's not a mural, it's not public art, it is a sign. So if y'all are looking for a quick fix to try and make peace up there, this ain't it.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. With that, are you keeping your motion intact?
That's just my comment so far on the motion.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Kier Woodson, Hampton District, that's why I thought that this has to be a two-part process. We also have to, I mean, now it's been raised, what is public art? And it's never going to be perfect, how we define it at a local level, but I think that's, to me, it would be an empty exercise, and I think this dovetails with Mr. Fraser's comments. It would be an empty exercise if we didn't take two steps here, refer this back. You're removing public art from the sign ordinance, then you define public art, so, in its own ordinance.
And I mean, when this first came up, I did quite a bit of research and checked into Reed v. Gilbert and what other localities are doing in this vein. And it is very much new because Reed v. Gilbert has just been a few years and there's not a lot of, we like to think that there's models out there that we can just pick up something and do what somebody else is doing. But that really does not very much exist. And we have a very experienced and capable planning commission seated at this time. And I would like for them to very much take on this work. I know they're completely capable of taking on this work. And so I would like to send this resolution that exists in the packet down to them.
Madam Chair, for my education, if we send this down to the Planning Commission and they have 100 days, does that mean anybody that could be outside of the zoning ordinances would be, any enforcement of that would be on hold until after the Planning Commission?
I would defer that question to Mr. Curry.
And, Ms. Summers and I would certainly take our direction from the board. We're not going to work with Mr. Goff to bring charges against a property owner if the law is about to change. We haven't been in that situation yet, and we might be after today. So, if the board signals that the law is going to change, then we're not going to tie up the courts.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we have, if there's no further discussion, is there any further discussion? All right, then we have a motion and a second. Ms. Donahue? Aye. Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Just to clarify, the motion is to send this to the Planning Commission for review.
Correct. The resolution as it exists in the packet.
Aye.
The 100-day definition clawback.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you. That takes us to the next agenda item, the change of regular Board of Supervisors meeting venue July and August 2020. If you would be so kind, please, Mr. Curry.
Yeah, I apologize for the TV. Apparently there's a timer that shuts it off every 30 minutes or so. We'll try to
If
figure
you
that
fall
one out.
asleep.
The Code of Virginia identifies the process through which the Board of Supervisors should follow when you change the location of your regular board meeting. That doesn't contemplate times of pandemic disaster. In leading up to this meeting, I worked through and followed all the steps required to change the location of your meeting, including advertising in the newspaper and posting on the door of the courthouse to notify the public who may be need to know to come to the meeting to know where it is. The other part that you're supposed to do is adopt a resolution. And while the board did, by consensus, agree to hold the meeting here at your last meeting, you did not adopt a resolution. And it's the intent of the board to hold this meeting and the August meeting in this location, and the school board will be meeting here and the Planning Commission and BZA as well. So in order to clean up our records and to be very clear for the August meeting, I prepared a resolution that identifies that, in fact, the regular meeting is changed for July and August to this location, and we'll go ahead and advertise that resolution in the paper for the August meeting. And also note that your continuity of government ordinance allows you to modify procedure where necessary due to the emergency for continuity of government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curry. And I would just, for the sake of ease, this is just housekeeping, I would make a motion that we adopt the resolution as presented in the packet. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Ms. Donahue? How do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you. I assumed since we were all here that there was no discussion. So, thank you. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, consider the request by the Amesville Volunteer Fire and Rescue to redesignated returned funds. Gary, did you want to introduce that item?
Yes, just very quickly. As the board will recall, back in February 3rd at your regular meeting, the president of Amesville Volunteer Fire and Rescue brought to you a check valued at $9,525 payable to the county from Amesville Volunteer Fire and Rescue. That check was issued to the county because Culpeper County, from whom Amesville Volunteer Fire and Rescue receives operational funding, alerted Amesville Volunteer Fire and Rescue that if Rappahannock County was providing 100% funding, what was their funding for? And so in order to remedy that issue, Amesville Volunteer Fire and Rescue decided to provide back to the county the value of the contribution from Culpeper so that they could continue to receive Culpeper money. And that we're very thankful for them for finding a way to keep that outside money flowing into our community. With all that said, President Atkins requested that the board consider sending that money back to Amesville, but not for operational, for capital. And of course, after that happened, we had one meeting and then COVID-19, and this action item has been on the side burner until this meeting when you could consider it. It is my recommendation to provide this funding back to them for capital. It would be very consistent with how outside funding is handled at Chester Gap and at Washington. So I think for consistency, it makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Mr. Fraser, this is your district. Did you want to lead the discussion on this, or do you have a motion in this regard?
Well, I can put it in the form of a motion if we go ahead and return the funds to Amesville. They gave it to the county of Rappahannock in good faith so that they wouldn't create an appearance of double dipping or whatever by taking money from Culpeper County, but they've lost so much revenue, just like every other fire EMS company in Rappahannock because of this COVID-19 shutdown. I think it would be appropriate, to return the money.
Thank you. So that's a motion from Mr. Fraser, and as the board member that received this check from Mr. Atkins, I really feel like I need to second that motion. Is there any further discussion regarding this agenda item?
I would just clarify, is that for capital, right, not for operation?
I would prefer it be for capital. Mr. Fraser, was that your understanding as well?
I don't want them to run afoul with Culpeper.
Yes, I'm sorry. I think they asked for it to be returned from the form of capital, and I think we should do that.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion?
It makes sense to me. I mean, if they're running calls in Culpeper, clearly there's vehicle depreciation and related wear and tear on vehicles. So the obvious capital hook makes good sense to me. And it's comforting to know that this kind of double counting is not only occurring on that side of the county. I recognize it's for companies on borders. So it's a unique situation. As long as we're consistent with how we're treating everyone, I'm comfortable with it.
Very good. If there's no further discussion, I'll call for the vote. Ms. Donahue? Aye. Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Fraser?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you. That takes us to the next agenda item, the Vanco Conference Room Reservation. Mr. Curry, please.
The Vanco conference this year, reservations are a little bit different than past years when the conference was held at the Homestead. This year it will be held in Norfolk at the Hilton. Apparently, the Homestead is going through some renovations. The county can reserve up to 4 rooms at the Norfolk Hilton through October 16th with the understanding that it is first come, first served. So this is my opportunity to alert the board that if members want to attend, we really need to make those decisions now and get those rooms booked now. There are $194 room rate with tax, but without meals. But at least in that setting, you have the opportunity to seek meals in many different places when you're downtown Norfolk, as opposed to when you're at the Homestead and you're really stuck there. I would like to go. I went last year, but leave that up to the board. It helps me keep my ICMA credential manager status with the continuing education.
And I would just say that I went last year, so I don't feel a need to go this year. I don't know how everybody else feels about it.
Madam Chair, I would like to attend this year if I can.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Mr. Whitson?
Yeah, I would attend also. I would like to attend also, and would offer that I'll pay my own way if others are in line ahead of me based on seniority and recognizing we're not going to fund rooms for everyone. So just keep me informed, but I'm happy to pay for it.
Well, one of the things that you did this year in adopting the budget was increase the training budget for board members. I think it's very important for board members to take advantage of VACO opportunities when you can.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish.
Well, I was there last year, and also I'm a short timer, so there's no need for me to go.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Mr. Fraser?
Well, I didn't realize there'd be so much interest in it. I thought about maybe attending it. So I don't know, whatever the board's preference is.
Well, I think we've budgeted to where whomever would like to can go for this year. If you do have an interest in going, I think we can work that out.
Also, all we have to do now is pay one night for each of the reservations, and if we cancel, we can get that money back as long as we cancel at least 3 days prior.
And when do you need to know by, Mr. Curry?
Sooner the better, before the rooms are gone.
Okay. So everyone can just follow up with Gary about that, please. We don't need to hold a vote on that. the money's already there, so.
Yes.
All right, that takes us to the CARES Act CRF distribution.
So board members are aware that the federal government has passed multiple forms of legislation to attempt to assist localities and states, one of which is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is part of the CARES Act. The long and short of it is that the Rappahannock County received our population proportional share of that funding to the state in the amount of $643,000. The board has many options on how to invest those dollars. You've already committed to provide funding to the schools in the amount of $150,000 in FY20. And I pull this table up. You will be able to see some additional options. You appropriated some funding to the county as well to cover some of our costs in FY20, which are really rather small that we've had so far. This may be too small for the people in attendance to see anyway. But it is in the board packet for people to review after the fact. Let's see if I can. So as I noted, the schools requested $150,000 in FY20 and have come back and provided a letter stating that they have additional expenditures within FY20 of approximately $50,000. So that would be an accounting measure that the board could take at the next meeting to recognize all that, or at least just recognize the receipts from the school board to account for those funds. If they're not funded through these CRF funds, then they're funded by the school's budget that they already have appropriated to them, and it's really accounting on which ledger it goes on. So any expenditures that the school had in FY20, I believe it's wise for us to use the CRF dollars if we can. The county's had some minor preventative measure costs, PPE, plexiglass sneeze guards in the offices, cleaning, and a few things that are in the works right now, and that's a relatively small amount right now. And most of these are just estimates at this time. And then when we see the bottom line, they add up to more than $643,000, so there will be some decisions to be made. And I've shown that at $20,000. We have a very small amount of personnel extra compensation costs, and those are completely linked to Mr. Williams and the extra hours he's had to work above and beyond his normal hours. We can make the case that all of his hours may be attributable, but I don't know why we would necessarily do that if we were already budgeted for him in the budget that was adopted on before March 27th. And then moving into more optional costs going forward, the schools in the letter that I just noted also identified 2 capital projects that could be done between now and December 30th that would help them with their instructional plan. One is to upgrade the seating in the auditorium at the high school such that it has little desk arms or whatever, and it's easier to clean. And they can bring classes in there spread out so that they're not confined to a small room. So that would pass muster for this use. The other, Dr. Grimsley mentioned, were the Chromebooks for students. And so that would provide a Chromebook, a 1-to-1 for, I believe, grades 4 and up. Oh, there you go. So those are some expenses that would be in FY21, and certainly options for the board to consider using these funds. The schools did receive coronavirus CARES Act money as well, but their funding can be used beyond December 30, 2020. So they believe they will have plenty of expenditures down the road to manage the altered instructional requirements that they will have to use up all that money as well. Moving down, there is the letter from the state requires us to provide funding to the town of Washington in an equitable share. I sent a letter to them identifying that because of their population being 95 in the 2018 communities survey, and with the county's population, that would break out to $8,000. Some localities around us are getting into some protracted discussion on how much the town should receive, but because our town has such a small population and would have such a small number, I didn't think it was worth an argument about it. Then moving on, some options would be to install air purification systems into our county building HVAC units. I've got a quote of $15,000 to add that to most of our units for our buildings. The fire and rescue volunteer agencies could also do that, and because it's a public health expense, I believe that could be funded out of this as opposed to just providing makeup revenue for a volunteer company, which is a little bit different. I should take a breath and note that there's a column in this table that identifies the guidance category / page. And if you look at the bottom, it identifies the guidance. G is for guidance general, and there's 2 documents that were released by the feds, a guidance document and a frequently asked questions. So there's a general section of that guidance, and then there are several examples built into that guidance. So you can see if it's GE, and then a number 2-2, that means it's the guidance example, page 2, bullet, or item 2, bullet 2. And then for the FAQ, it's the page on the FAQ. So looking back up, the board has already discussed behind the scenes my suggestion to work with the business of Rappahannock to provide portable toilets in and around the community to limit the interaction of tourists as they're passing through or travelers that are passing through in our stores and whatnot. That's a relatively small expense of $4,000, assuming that would run out through about end of September. Chester Gap Volunteer Fire and Rescue has had to hire independent EMS contractors. The expense in FY20 is approximately $26,816, or perhaps exactly $26,816. Assuming that will move forward through July and August, just estimating another $15,000 for that. It could go longer, it could go shorter. The board ultimately, one way or another, being an operational expense, will bear that cost through the fire service fund. Because your agreement with the fire companies identifies that the county will fund operational costs. So if we can use this funding source or account for this funding source, then I think that's a good option. Unless there are other more important reasons. The county park, the rec authority, has not officially requested this, but I've been in touch with them and at their meetings. They do have a capital project in the wings to try to renovate their bathrooms so that they're more modern. And I think there's a layered approach that they could bring to provide touch-free restroom facilities there. So proper door handles, proper sinks, proper toilets, etc. And many other localities are doing this in their buildings, and it's something the county could do in our buildings as well if we wanted to, but going through touch-free restroom facilities. They've asked for funding for a second portable toilet, which is negligible, quite frankly, but I listed it on the table. A big item, and I don't have a cost number right now, and I think it's eligible, and I've listed in a column on the right whether the probability of it being acceptable, whether high, medium, low. I didn't list any low because I think it'd be a waste of everybody's time. But that would be a telephony upgrade for the county offices. It's very difficult for employees to work from home and have access to telephones right now because our telephone system is very antiquated. If we could upgrade to a VoIP phone system, it would be very portable and it would allow any employee to work from home as if they were in the office relative to phones. And the next step would be the computer side of things, which I've already tried. I've also tried to identify here. So I had some cost estimates from when we were working with Chantel, but I need to fine tune that information a little bit. The other is our enterprise resource software, our finance software we use for Keystone. The board just authorized staff to bring the building permit software into that realm. That can be hosted from the cloud rather than on our own server. And so if we are taking options or finding ways to allow our employees to work from home, if they can also tie into the Keystone from anywhere, that would also allow them to better work from home or on the street or anywhere. So that is an option, and there's a quote coming for that. Along with those same lines, there are several add-on features to our Keystone service that would allow citizens and employees to connect through the web. So you could more easily pay your taxes by web. You could more easily apply for building permits and not have to go to the building office by web. And that is an option, and you can see that if we fully enable that, it's $58,000, but there is a carry-on cost of $11,500. Adding on top of that would be if we're enabling all these staff to have opportunities for work from home, then laptops would be critical, and that assumes, just assume $10,000. Not all of our staff would have to be positioned to do that. And then it's tough for the buildings and zoning to do all that work from home if they have to find a big roll of drawings. So a wide format scanner in the office, you could get all those wide format drawings into PDF form, and then they could review them from wherever. So we wouldn't be stuck with people all together. You could put them pretty much anywhere to review those things. Moving on to other non-county requests. There are separate requests from Business of Rappahannock, Teresa Wood, and some folks in Sperryville, Kerry Sutton, on marketing campaigns for to alert the world that the businesses are back open here in Rappahannock. That is an allowable expense. The recent guidance does suggest, however, that it can be a we are open, but it can't be a full-on rebranding that would last forever. So we would have to be a little bit careful. Ms. Wood suggested $100,000, which was made up of a number of smaller amounts, and so I just put that in this spot as a placeholder, that it would cover anything the Business of Rappahannock would need and any specific items that the Sperryville Community Alliance would need, and that would take a whole lot of additional work to sort through on how you could properly invest those funds. Sperryville also thought that it may make sense to have internet hotspots along Main Street. I know a lot of businesses along that stretch do have Wi-Fi, and then when visitors come to town, they have to go into the business to access that. If it was available on Main Street, maybe you could eliminate some contact and there's a public health angle there, and you can expand rural broadband to assist telework, but those funds, according to the latest guidance, can only fund the covered period. So it says that you can fund in advance, so you could buy a whole year's worth, if that's typical for your policies and practices. I don't know if we can get past that one. Many localities do have a small business grant program, and the research that I've conducted indicates that you can include nonprofits in this small business grant program, to include our volunteer fire and rescue nonprofits. And I didn't identify a number here, but the guidance suggests that there must be equal opportunity to those in need. So I think it may be difficult to just hand a bunch of money to fire and rescue for business interruption, not having a carnival or fireworks, if you don't also find a way to provide funding to other small businesses. But it is a very clearly allowable process to provide small business grants. It is directly allowable. We just would need to make sure there's equal opportunity for those in need. So it doesn't, the guidance was very clear. It cannot be just simply divide up the pool of money to everybody and all citizens, because you can provide individual aid too. It has to be COVID related. So we would have to figure out how do we devise a program that would get just enough information in from small businesses and nonprofits to determine their need and connection to COVID-19. We can fund any increased audit costs that we have to make sure that we're using these funds in the right way. So I just penciled in $15,000 to add on to our Robinson Farmer Cox agreement so that they can double check everything that we've done, and they will be responsible for reviewing that. And then there's other nonprofit public health expenses. So not items that are business interruption related, but items that are specifically related to public health protection in a public area. And nonprofits may be involved in that. And that could be reducing high-touch surfaces. It could be helping testing. It could be barriers in certain areas to restrict how public can freely access or certain areas where you wouldn't necessarily want them to. And so I've kept that fairly general and fairly small dollar amount. Any of these dollar amounts other than the ones with the specific quotes could change. But all these totaled up, and that does not include anything, or a few of these line items where there are question marks that don't have numbers, exceeds the amount that we have allocated to us right now. So what I would like to hear through some form is where the board has a thought to focus on some of these areas that we can develop much more detailed information to bring back and make decisions. If there are certain items that you think are very clearly should move forward, we can identify those, and I've identified an approved, I've identified a priority item, so then we can kind of push aside some of the things that maybe aren't high on the list and begin to focus on some of the others to make sure this money gets through the system by December 30th, which this guidance has also been clarified to state we need to receive the good or service by December 30th. We don't necessarily have to pay for it. And so that's normally how we would handle it, but that's not how it originally read, but that's been clarified. And they assume that we will get a bill and pay for it within 90 days.
Is that everything?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Curry.
Very thorough.
I appreciate that. I imagine there will be a lot of questions about this. And are you looking for any action on this today, or we're just
if there are
reviewing
certain
it
items
preliminarily?
that the board thinks can move forward, for example, the additional funding for the schools for FY20, that's time sensitive. If either of the capital items for the schools are acceptable, I think those are time sensitive, because if there are going to be renovations to the auditorium, they need to get going right away.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Do I have a motion, any motions in regards to this agenda item or further discussion?
I think Mr. Curry's just looking for some ideas of what to prioritize, what he thinks important, which obviously the school is probably the first thing. Probably not. Well, I do think it would be wonderful to have a year-round bathroom there at the park. I think we've been needing that for a long time. And then those are the two things that pop out for me. The businesses are at Rappahannock. That's probably a good idea. And then, of course, with the emergency services, those really important things are obviously need to be taken care of. So it's a nice opportunity to actually have this available. So that's generally what I'm thinking.
Any other discussion?
And I don't know if the superintendent wants to add anything to the school items. You have her captive audience here using her facility.
You're welcome to speak, Shannon, if you'd like.
so you can hear me. Yes, the items identified we felt were pretty time sensitive, because as Mr. Curry did say, we have to get moving on those orders if we are going to reopen in mid-August, which is very close to us. So I appreciate your consideration of that. FY20, as we calculated back, we do have an additional $150,000 on top of what you have on the chart in the letter. So just to clarify, it's actually a total $200,000 in FY20 request over and above the 150 that can be directly related to operational COVID expenses.
Let's back up.
So I apologize for not making that clear.
You have the board appropriated $150,000 already.
Yes.
And you have another
That was up to March, yes, between March and May 18th on getting ready for prepping for reopening, continuing distance learning, continuing distance feeding programs, all of those pieces. So that's what I just wanted to clarify that too, and that's in the letter. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, it wasn't clear.
I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So that number's a little higher.
That brings some interesting opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the total additional amount that you weren't aware of, Mr. Curry?
It sounds like $150,000.
So that takes us to 822 instead of 723?
I'm still not sure that Dr. Grimsley and I are on the same page, but as I've said before, any CARES Act dollars that can be accounted for in the school budget of FY20, any dollars unspent by the schools at the end of FY20 are returned to the general fund. So any dollars that were spent by the schools that could be otherwise categorized as CARES Act dollars will only add to the amount of dollars that are returned to the general fund at the end of the fiscal year. So I would prioritize those if you can, because those general fund dollars can be spent on anything without any restriction.
Yeah, I think it's clear that the school is the most important thing and the most affected by this pandemic. And I mean, just the little tablets they need to get their homework if they can't come to school and all that stuff. It's got to be probably the first thing to take care of on this list.
So just in terms of, so I'm clear on any money that comes out of the county allotment of CARES Act funds, can that be handled administratively?
Some of it has already.
There's some misunderstanding or disagreement about what money they already have in the bank. So
a couple meetings ago, the board appropriated $150,000 to let the school know very clearly that amount would be available in FY20, and you actually appropriated $200,000 for the board, really as a placeholder, not knowing what was going to come up, and just to cover a couple things that we knew we had over time and the small PPE type things, but those are very, very small, knowing that at the end of the fiscal year, whatever isn't spent, the appropriation expires and we start over in FY21. And we will bring to you at your next meetings additional appropriations for FY21 that add back in all of the CARES Act funds that weren't spent in FY20, as well as other capital items that weren't spent on time that need to be spent now in 21 rather than 20. I know that can get very confusing when we move from one fiscal year to another.
Right.
But, so, Dr. Grimsley, you think you have $350,000 in CARES Act eligible funds that have already been spent in FY20? Since March 1st. So I'm missing $150,000 on my spreadsheet. If we can trace all those expenses to clearly two eligible categories, that would be my preference. So take that right off the top. Good.
I guess the one component that I still have questions about, and I believe this is a challenging area to cover, but I mean, we have one fire and rescue company on the spreadsheet, But we have all these companies that have had to cancel their fundraisers on which they depend every year to cover their capital. So I guess my question is, you have to figure out how to do for everybody in a time like this. And I know down in Sperryville, of course, we lost our 50-50 dinner. We've lost the fireworks. There are still bills to pay. I know Amesville's in the same boat with the carnival this year. That's a big fundraiser for them. So how do we address concerns like this? And I don't mean to speak for you, Mr. Frazier, but there's bills that have to be paid, and there's not that revenue from the events like there usually is. Is there a way to do that within this framework?
So the small business grant program is the only way that I've identified that you can do that.
Okay. I did talk to Patrick Monty at RRRC last week, and he is helping to administer some of those sorts of things for other localities in the area. They are not taking on the large project for the town of Culpeper, but I think he said Gordonsville and Orange are doing smaller scale projects that might be in their, that it might be something that would be in his wheelhouse to help us with these. So I think we need to look into how to structure that, and I'm happy to further that conversation if the rest of the board think that that's appropriate.
Yeah, it's a lost opportunity because of the pandemic. They cannot raise that money. The parade was canceled. The name is still exempt.
It's the major fundraisers are a real hit
Yeah,
this year.
they're definitely taking a hit because of the pandemic. So if they figure out a way to.
Mr. Curry, you and I had a brief discussion because I had an inquiry from a local nonprofit that has its headquarters in the Hampton voting district. And they were just asking what eligibility they might have under County CARES Act money, and you're going to talk to counterparts in surrounding localities. Right. Is this discussion of these grants, is that basically the conclusion you reached through those conversations?
They would be eligible as a small business, albeit a nonprofit one. And so the guidance just says that we must have equal opportunity to those in need, whatever that means.
Okay. And then my only other comment, since I joined the board, I've been very concerned about our telephone costs and lack of technology in that regard. So I would like to see the telephone system upgrade and also the movement of the ERP to the cloud and any other software or hardware upgrades that would allow for remote work. I think those should be a priority, but not only from a continuity of government standpoint, but also just to save taxpayers money. We're spending way too much on antiquated phones.
I don't disagree. So everything on this table is kind of falls into the category probably of things that one or more board members would want to see done. And particularly if you add another $150,000 to the column, it exceeds the funding. But due to the unique accounting with the schools, there may be general fund balance dollars to help tackle some of these other items that the board can prioritize and not worry as much about some of the details of whether they're eligible or not, because it would just be general fund dollars and your capital discretion in the future.
Is there any further discussion?
I would just agree with Mr. Whitson with regards to the technology, anything that we can do to upgrade the buildings for our staff. I think nobody's going to argue about voice over IP as long as we know the expense of getting the wires pulled for that. Making sure that we're with a company that's going to be reliable. When Comcast goes down, my phones go down. So,
yeah, a lot to think about, and maybe those would be challenged by December 30th. I don't know. How does the board want to proceed? You could have another meeting specifically about this. You could, I'm open to ideas.
I think it would make sense to get Mr. Curry to sift through this and let him come up with a recommendation for the board, and that would be the least cumbersome way to handle this, I believe. And then Mr. Curry's got the most direct contact with these other entities. So I think that's probably the most efficient way to proceed, is to allocate the responsibility over to Mr. Curry for now.
Mr. Frazier, did you have anything to add?
Well, no, I was looking at the numbers, and there's definitely so much of this that we can't do. So, I don't know, we seem to always be tasked with Mr. Curry with doing more. I think he brings things to us, and he wants us to prioritize, and we try to hand it back to him to do the prioritizing. So I don't know that, without looking at this a little bit longer, I know exactly what the board should be making decisions on, but I think initially, if we could just give the school system that 150, look at some of this other stuff, maybe within the course of the next month.
Well, if I understand this correctly, we've already allocated $150,000 to the school board, correct?
Correct.
And the school board request that's still on the table is the following amounts: the $50,000 that's still on the table, an additional $150,000 that we were not aware of or that got lost in translation. So we have $200,000 total, plus $85,000, plus basically $63,000. So today's request in full from the school board is $348,000. Is that correct? And we've already allocated $150,000, which would mean if we made a full allocation today for the request of the school board, plus what we've already allocated to the school board, we would be up to $500,000 of the $623,000 that's in play.
Yeah, I just don't see that that's possible without, we don't even know, where the end of the need is going to be. We're really at the beginning of this thing as far as expenditures.
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I just want to make sure that I understand what you said correctly, Dr. Brimsley. Okay. We could take this up at our work session. We could allocate some of the money today. Is there a preference on the board?
Yeah, I'd be a lot more comfortable in light of this misunderstanding on the funds that have already been spent at the school. I think it would behoove us to maybe have a work session to go through this, not unlike a budget-related work session, because it's not that different. I mean, we have money that we have to appropriate for very specific spending purposes, not to mention the back-end audit process to which we'd be subjected. So we're having to follow rules. Obviously, Mr. Curry's been studying and talking to counterparts in other localities to get it as right as he can, but I feel like it's incumbent upon us to make sure we know what this money is going toward and make good decisions thereof.
Very good.
So I would put that in the form of a motion that we schedule a work session sometime before our next regular meeting to fine tune these called appropriations under the CARES Act funds.
And we would table this item until that time. Do I have a second?
I'd second.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Mr. Whitson made the motion. Ms. Donahue made the second. Is there any further discussion?
So I would just say that because we don't have a date, time, and place certain, that will just be a called meeting at some point in time by either the chair or two members once we get the schedule.
Recognize that it seems like we can't wait until our next regular meeting.
I agree. I would like.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot to hash out here. So.
Sounds good. Sounds like there's a consensus. Ms. Donahue? Aye. Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, the reassessment agreement with Wingate and Associates. It's getting to be 4:15. Should we take a brief recess and come back in 10 minutes?
Pleasure on board.
All right, we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
never perfect or precise, but they're meant to be assessment and not appraisal. And sometimes people lose sight of that. At any rate, we've prepared an agreement, myself, the Commissioner of Revenue, have had it reviewed by the county attorney, and it is attached to this item in board docs. And I'm asking for authorization to have me sign that agreement on behalf of the county so we can move on and get this process rolling.
Gary, I just wanted to double check if I could, please. We have to do this now. We can't kick this down the road to next year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Well then, for ease of simplicity, I would just make a motion that we accept the reassessment agreement as it's presented in the packet, and I would ask for a second.
I have a couple of questions.
I was wanting to make the motion and then have the discussion.
Okay, I'll make a second.
And then there's a second by Mr. Parrish. Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Yes, please go ahead.
So it says here that it's $30.50 per parcel. So that means whether the parcel has a house on it or not, they're going to charge us $30.50 to assess that parcel?
So essentially it's average cost for them. They come in and they look at all the parcels we have. They're looking at the total cost that it's going to cost them. They just back it out to a per parcel cost.
And the other counties are paying the same?
It's a little bit different for each county based on the number of parcels they have.
We have 9,000 parcels, is that what we have? Because they didn't give us, they should be able to know what the total is going to be.
Oh, they do, and that's what our fiscal year 21 and year 22 budget will be based on. That was the $90,000 amount.
So it's 90,000 is the
for
total?
about half of it. It's about 180,000.
It's really 100. So I think there's about 9,000 parcels in the county. Now the other thing is, it says $15 per manufactured home. What do they mean by manufactured? Does that mean stick built and everything, every home?
That's basically trailers. Very few of those.
And then the $3 for the digital photograph, that's something that we can opt not to do. Or
that is correct.
Right. So I just wonder what they charged us last time.
I do not have that.
I know it's been 6 years ago, and I'm wondering what they charged last time, and I'm also wondering what the other counties are paying.
And unfortunately, I don't have those with me.
Because they've done this county before, and
Yes.
so they have all this. That's all in their computers. They can just spit it out.
They're going to go to every parcel.
Right. I realize that. The ones they can get to.
Well, sure. I can try it depending on what time we finish. This session, I can try to gather information to answer additional questions before the evening, if you'd like, or if you're going to have a work session in the middle of the month, you can push this item
can
to
we
that
postpone
meeting.
it till then and do a little more research, because we could possibly negotiate with them. They're not going to walk away from this because they got all the information in their on hand, and it's going to be a really easy job for them, and they may not need this much money to do it.
We can try.
There's no harm in asking.
So if I'll withdraw my motion and you withdraw your second, and I'll make a motion that we table it until the work session pending additional information.
Yeah, I think we have time, since they're not going to start till September.
Alrighty, and then if you'd like to go ahead and continue to second that, Chris?
Yes, I'll second it. I'll second that. Yeah.
Okay. And is there any further discussion?
My only question was the math that Mr. Parrish just threw out 9,000 parcels,
I
but
think we have closer to 7,000.
it's 7,000. Okay, that makes more sense because you're saying 180, and that would be 270,000. So, but we can work out. I guess
I have
we
a
can work
thick
that.
file of this, but it's in my
We can
office.
work that out. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Curry.
Yeah, thanks,
All right,
Chris.
so we have a motion and a second. Mr. Frazier, did you have any concerns?
No, just, I concur with Mr. Parrish. It seemed kind of pricey.
Very good. All right, we have a motion and a second to table it pending additional information at our next meeting. Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Curry? Oh, Mr. Curry.
Frazier.
Mr. Frazier, I'm so sorry. You're still not voting, Gary, I'm sorry. Mr. Frazier? And I also. Thank you. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, and that's the Sperryville improved, the discussion of Board Supervisors Policy 830, electronic meeting participation. And I think this was requested to be put on the agenda by Mr. Frazier.
Yes, if I could, I was just, there seems to have been a little misunderstanding about what happened at the Planning Commission meeting, and I just wanted to know if the board thought that it would be prudent if we look at our policy with that the partial sentence where it says, if challenged, and that's what led to the discussion and maybe some misunderstanding at the Planning Commission level.
I did want to add to the beginning of this discussion that I did forget to mention during our public comment period that I did receive some feedback from Mr. Martin Woodard, who resides in my district, and he submitted a letter regarding this to today's meeting, and he had concerns about it, which I wrote back to him via email. And I believe we are waiting for an opinion from the Foia Council, Mr. Gerhardt. So I would like to see that before I comment on this one way or the other, and I just wanted to see how the other members felt about this as well.
Well, since I asked for it to be on the agenda, I'm happy to defer to you on that.
And I'm happy to hear any further discussion amongst the members on this.
Madam Chair, Keir Whitson, representing the Hampton District. I found the events at the Planning Commission meeting very disturbing, and I'm concerned that the Planning Commission is now in need of a FOIA officer who does not also sit on the Planning Commission, given what happened. I mean, no matter how I slice and dice it, I feel like three members were excluded under really dubious justification. So what I'd like is, and I'll put this in the form of a motion for further discussion. I'd like to ask the county attorney to determine whether or not our local governing body could appoint an independent FOIA officer for the Planning Commission. And I think that would require some legal research, but I think it's important in light of what happened. And Ms. Smith, you mentioned that you heard from one constituent. I've heard from many who were very upset with how the events transpired, and I don't think that the Planning Commission now has a FOIA officer who can guide them going forward on questions like those that came up and that Mr. Frazier is alluding to here. So since this is an agenda item and it comes down to a matter of electronic participation that was at the root of the problem at the recent Planning Commission, I would move that we ask our county attorney, Mr. Goff, to research the question of whether the Board of Supervisors may appoint an independent FOIA officer to guide the Planning Commission going forward.
Mr. Curry, as our FOIA officer, could you just reacquaint us with how we get a FOIA officer for each body? I know even like the fire departments have to have them as well.
Every public body must have a FOIA officer. That was actually modified this year in General Assembly to make it clear that even regional public bodies must have FOIA officers. But we no longer have to report our who the FOIA officer is to the Foia Council every year. We just have to do it once. And I think now we get to train every other year versus every year. But it's silent on how one gets appointed. You just have to have one. The board identified me by resolution to serve as the board's FOIA officer. And the Planning Commission at the beginning of the year, in their organizational meeting, had the discussion of who was going to be their FOIA officer, and I stated that I've been serving as their FOIA officer and was willing to continue to serve.
So we could adopt another resolution if there was a party that was willing and we could appoint someone to serve?
It's not clear that, and this is I think the question of Mr. Goff, whether one public body can assign a FOIA officer for another public body.
And I'm not intending to overstep here, but questions have been raised about whether this is working at the Planning Commission level. I recognize that that's an independent body, so I'm moving only to ask Mr. Goff to research this question of whether we would be in a position to appoint a FOIA officer to the Planning Commission.
Could I ask a point of order here?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Frazier.
I don't understand why our board would want to do that unless we're looking at some way to try and manipulate a situation. But it really, I understand if people want to contact their supervisor about questions or complaints, but the stuff that I've read and not what I heard today during public comment, you have people commenting on something that they have no knowledge of, and that is obvious by their comments. And I think it's wrong for our board to start dealing by emotions simply because somebody's upset about something they don't understand. And that's exactly where this is headed. 3 members excluded themselves from the planning commission. And that's what happened. It wasn't they were excluded. They took it upon themselves to not show up and become part of the quorum. And now because 2 or 3 people or 10 or 15 people complain to their supervisor about something they don't understand, why in the world would our board get itself involved in the tall weeds on something because simply somebody doesn't understand what went on? I think what we need to do is maybe we can discuss it, maybe educate the public on it, but we're going down a wrong trail here. I was one of those planning commissioners that showed up, and we had a quorum. And if one of those 4 members had decided that they wanted to take a personal electronic meeting or couldn't show up for whatever reason, we would not have had a quorum. We would have not have had that discussion, that vote. There wouldn't have been articles in the newspaper. There wouldn't have been letters to the editor. There wouldn't have been this discussion right now, simply because 3 members decided that they didn't want to come. And it was borderline obstructionism by 3 members of the planning commission. And now we're going to go down this rabbit trail. I'm sorry, I can't join y'all on it.
Well, just a question, why is this on the agenda?
Well, I just asked if we wanted to discuss it, but we're not discussing it. We want to try and take a course of action without even discussing it. All it was is a simple statement. I asked to put it on there if we want to clarify it, because what came up at the planning commission was the one partial sentence, if challenged. Mr. Henry made a challenge. As far as a motion, it was second, and the quorum voted on it 4-0. It was a unanimous vote by the planning commissioners there that they didn't think the other 3 members had a legitimate reason to miss their meeting. They could have used personal reason. They chose not to. So do we want to look at ours? That's what I was talking about, not theirs.
Oh, I see. That's the way it's on the agenda. Well, I guess if we want to take on our personnel or our Board of Supervisors policy on electronic meetings, the way to do that would be refer it back to the Rules Committee, who developed the policy.
That's pretty much what I had in mind, and it seems like we're just going off in the wrong direction.
Is ours different from the planning commission?
No, I think we adopted ours, which allowed them to just, swap out the names.
So we're
Board of
using the exact
Supervisors,
same,
Planning Commission.
we're using the same policy.
Yeah, we're using the same template. So if we modify ours, it would follow suit that they would modify theirs.
The planning commission's already changed it.
They've already changed theirs? Yeah. So what change did they make?
They added some language requiring specificity of the medical condition that precludes the member from attending, and some other things.
Is that a good idea or not a good idea, in your opinion?
Not in my opinion.
It's not a good idea?
But that's where I differ from others. So.
Well, why don't we just drop it for now? We got one right here. We can just still use what we got.
Well, I think that if we referred it back to the Rules Committee, they will clearly have a difference of opinion and be able to maybe make some headway on this topic if there is something that needs refinement. And I did sit in on that meeting. Mr. Whitson wasn't in the area, so I did sit on the Rules Committee when this was developed, so it would be vetted by different people than the people that originally reviewed it.
I appreciate that.
So, I thought this was a very good thing we were doing when we adopted this electronic policy, and I hoped it would serve us very well. As the supervisor for one of the districts that was not represented, I hated that it blew up because that was not the intention of passing this. I also do think that, we do have to be concerned with the integrity of our work product as we go through processes. And this is a very challenging time to try to keep that integrity intact. And if there are ways for the Rules Committee to improve the policy by reviewing it again, I think it would behoove us to send it back to them.
It's probably a good idea because this pandemic could come back on us and we'd be back to having electronic meetings again. And but I'm wondering who constitutes the Rules Committee? Who's on that?
It's Mr. Frazier, Mr. Whitson, and then I'm an alternate.
Okay.
So it will go back, and clearly there's a difference of opinion, and I hate to say that that's usually the best way to get something done is to have two people that have differences of opinion and figure out the middle ground. But I do think that might be the most productive path forward.
Right. So right now we have a motion on the floor, right? No second so far. Is that what we're dealing with?
That's correct. And the motion, if I recall correctly, is to request from the county attorney for an opinion of the ability of this board to appoint a FOIA officer for the Planning Commission. Is that correct, Mr. Whitson?
That's correct. Yeah, and it's Mr. Frazier rightfully so brought this topic onto the agenda because I think in part, as he pointed out, there was some confusion about how this electronic meeting participation policy was interpreted, and by association it becomes a FOIA question. And in fact, I did listen to complaints from constituents, but I also did my own analysis, and I think it's reasonable to say, to use a technical term, something ain't working on the Planning Commission, Mr. Frazier. And so I think that it would be reasonable to at least figure out if we as a governing body can appoint an independent FOIA officer.
So let me ask this.
Well, again, I have to differ with you on that. I don't think that's not the part that's not working. The part that's not working is you had 3 members out of 7 that didn't want to show up at a meeting. That's the part that wasn't working.
So Mr. Frazier, what would be your approach to obtaining a FOIA officer for the Planning Commission?
Well, the Planning Commission hasn't discussed it, but I mean, they could appoint one of the members that's already there to be the Planning Commission FOIA officer.
And just as a general question, not necessarily to you specifically, but maybe to Mr. Goff, what is the ramification of the Planning Commission meeting without a FOIA officer like they did last time?
Well, they're required to have a FOIA officer.
Well, they met last time without a FOIA officer.
But that was just one meeting. It's not like that's the general rule of things that they're going to, carry on the rest of the year like that.
Yeah, that's my question. To Mr. Goff, what is the ramification of meeting without a FOIA officer?
Well, I think that count on whatever votes they get. I think the FOIA officer statutory requirements, but I don't think you can go unfilled for any length of time. I think that
So the answer is that they cast it out on the decisions they make during that meeting without a FOIA officer.
I think so.
Okay, I'm just wondering.
Mr. Frazier, do you think by our next regularly scheduled or work session that the Planning Commission could appoint a FOIA officer?
Yes, that's all we had was the continuing meeting we didn't have on the agenda, but I don't know why I wouldn't do it the next agenda.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. Do you have a second?
The motion, can I get the motion?
To appoint, for this board to appoint a FOIA officer, you have requested opinion from the county attorney as to whether this board can appoint a FOIA officer for the Planning Commission.
A FOIA officer for the Planning Commission. Do we have that authority?
As Mr. Curry said, it's not clear. I'm going to have to think about that.
Right. Yeah.
Try to parse it out.
Right.
I can't sit here and say that
Right. So why don't we give the Planning Commission an opportunity to solve their own problem first? And
And if you could take that into consideration, I don't think we need to have a vote for a formal opinion, but if you
Well,
could take that into consideration, maybe Mr.
On the other
Voss.
hand, I don't see the harm of just seeing what's possible. So I'll second the motion just to pursue, not that we'd have to act on anything, but at least we can find out what the possibility is. So I'll second it.
All right.
So I'm clear about something. Next planning commission meeting is the 15th.
I understand.
Are you asking to do it before the 15th? If it be before, or if this board, it turns out, can appoint, it doesn't matter if they vote for on the 15th, right?
I agree.
You can somebody else. Their choice. Okay? So does it have to be in by the 15th? I'm just asking for direction, order.
Time doesn't matter. I think all I'm asking is just research the question. I'm new to local government, so I'm asking the question. Okay. You're the attorney, so I'd like to find out.
All right, so if I give it to you before the next regular board of supervisors, I will.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Goff.
Thank you.
Mr. Parrish, is there any other discussion on this topic? Thank you. Ms. Dunaway? Aye. Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish? Mr. Fraser?
Nay.
And I also. Thank you. That takes us to Sperryville improved pedestrian safety and traffic calming. I requested this be on the agenda. An organization in the Piedmont District brought to me about 2 weeks ago for consideration. I've met with the Sperryville Community Alliance, I guess 4 times. I have talked to VDOT about the potential to work together on this, on the items in this resolution, and I have had a discussion about RRRC in terms of the items that are in the resolution. So, I mean, I think it's clear from the public comment portion of the beginning of this session that the challenge of this is right now in the middle of COVID, being able to engage all the community on something like this in person, up and down the street, which is something that I do still have to do. I just know that everything we do takes time and energy and resources, regardless of if we have another entity willing to pay for a lot of the measures that are going on. And so I just wanted to make sure that there was a consensus among the board members as I spend time on this and continue these discussions with the Sperryville Community Alliance and RRRC and VDOT, that there's a consensus from the board that this is a project that would be good to take on as a county, and that we should work toward building this project. And I just want to make sure that that I'm being completely transparent about what's going on and not end up with a finished product that doesn't have buy-in and can't be successful.
So Sperryville is the most viable community in the county in terms of attracting visitors, and so it does seem to make a lot of sense to make it more visitor friendly. I think it's a good promotion for tourism too. So sounds like a good idea to me. So you're saying that it's going to end up where it's not going to cost the taxpayer any extra money?
Well, that's the intention, and I do think we need to consider, and I know Mr. Curry has been very busy with the radio system these last few days, and I think I sent, or this final form of the resolution you've had maybe a week now. And so, I would need guidance on what we need to have in place in terms of agreements to make sure that the taxpayers are not on the hook for these projects. So that's where it gets into everything we do takes time and money and energy, regardless of whether it's actually money. It's still money because it's clearly going to require staff time And I know that staff time is also at a premium right now with all of the radio work that we have going on. And clearly the COVID crisis management is very time consuming. And, just the regular in and out of our monthly business can be time consuming.
And by the same token, a lot of the work can be done by the Sperryville Community Alliance.
That is the beauty of working with a nonprofit organization, is that what in that relationship can we benefit from in terms of, what can they bring to the table to get goals in place that are agreeable to the community, that are, and that are properly planned. So that's, I know it's sort of a out of nowhere resolution, and it has only been 2 weeks in the making, but I just wanted to talk to you all as my fellow board members and make sure that, let you know what I'm working on building, and that I am seeking community engagement, and that regardless of who has buy-in, there's no such thing as a free ride, and that you're okay with me continuing to pursue this project.
I'm fine with helping out Sperryville, but I will say that most of my neighbors are not interested in helping the, tourism in Sperryville. They doesn't benefit them whatsoever. But in general, this looks like a good idea.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Mr. Whitson or Ms. Donahue, did you have anything to add to the discussion?
No, I think what they're trying to do makes sense. As you said, nothing goes fast when government gets involved. Doesn't seem to anyway. So we've got to deal with VDOT and everything else. I think an engineering study is going to take some time as well if they end up going that route. And maybe they can do that with their own cash ahead of time and get the ball rolling. I don't want to slow them down, but some things just take time.
Thank you. Mr. Whitson?
I think it's important that we get behind this just from a VDOT perspective, and I noted that the regional commission on which you sit would also play some role in this, perhaps from a broader planning perspective. So since you are a representative to the regional commission, it would make sense that you use this time to engage with them and see what resources from the regional commission you can bring to bear on the needs of Sperryville. And I would just also echo the comments from a citizen who spoke earlier, and just I hope that it'll be businesses and citizens working together, and it sounds like you're making every effort in that regard. I think it's a great initiative, and I applaud the energy coming out of Sperryville. I sat on the sewer authority there for a number of years, and it's just really been incredible to see how business has accelerated and how much private equity has gone into building that community. So clearly now is the time to kind of get the traffic under control, and it can be out of control for sure, as sadly some people have experienced recently. So.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Mr. Frazier?
I certainly wouldn't want to stand in the way of Sperryville community having some necessary improvements or upgrades, but I've been contacted by a couple of people that feel like things are moving up there without them, as property owners, being involved in it all. And I think that needs to be addressed before the board getting any further involved in it.
And I understand that, and I do want to acknowledge that there is legwork that needs to be done for sure. And it is it's not really a time that people want to answer their doors right now. So figuring out how to get that done can be very challenging. And I will certainly be working on that. But like I said before, I engage it and move it forward. I just wanted to make sure that the rest of the board felt this was something worthwhile to pursue.
Is this a situation that the board could, facilitate some of those meetings, and so that it wouldn't basically turn into like this bike trail did, where a small group of people were basically dictating to everyone else what we were going to get involved in the pacing?
And that may make sense to have, a public meeting that this is the focus on. This being our first meeting in 3 months, I would be hesitant to say when that would be appropriate. I think for the next 30 days, what I'll do is work to touch base with my constituents that live up and down the rest of the street, and engage people one-on-one, and then perhaps in the work session, we can talk about whether a larger public meeting would be appropriate.
Madam Chair, is there an action you wish for us to take?
No, not really. I just wanted to make sure that there was a consensus on the board that this is something that we're interested in doing. From my perspective, there have been several things, really basic things that we've asked VDOT to do. Some are like drainage type issues, helping with speed reduction measures, traffic calming, that sort of thing in the village, that it's been very challenging to make any headway with VDOT. So at the end of the day, what is the most successful, comprehensive approach to those challenges? And the fact is, we have to have a discussion, and we have to take some kind of formal action like a resolution. And I expect that will continue to be, shaped in the next month or so, and then we'll revisit the resolution, define the parties' roles more clearly, I would think would be in order, Mr. Curry.
Yeah, and my goal would be to confirm that we're asking the right parties to do the right things.
Correct.
And so I can tell you I've not looked into it with much detail at this point.
Well, I know you've had a full plate the last week with some sudden changes that came your way, so I do appreciate that, and I do always try to be sensitive to what's already going on. But if it's okay for the rest of the board, I will just go ahead and work on that and report back. Probably at the work session, I'll have additional information.
So you don't want to address this resolution today? This is just for initial review? Is that
Yeah, I mean, it's in the new business part of the agenda. So in terms of action, I think reviewing it and starting to hear feedback is the appropriate action for today. That takes us to board committee reports. Are there any committees that have reports to bring forward? Or that wish to announce their next meeting date?
Recreational Facilities Authority Board will be meeting this coming Thursday. Their last meeting was really the first one in many months, so there was a lot of pent-up business. The most immediate discussion has been related to a summer camp that will be held at the county park, and all of the health precautions and bathroom cleaning protocol that will have to be handled as part of the park hosting that summer camp, which commences, Mr. Curry, is it immediate? I mean, this week, I believe.
I think so. I apologize.
But as Mr. Curry mentioned, the CARES Act discussion, there's ongoing review of viable options for upgrading restrooms at the park, and with this COVID-19 crisis, that's obviously been a point of concern. But very active board, good leadership there, a lot going on. So I encourage anyone who has the time to go check out the park. It's looking better and better every day.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Any other reports?
Not really a report, but the broadband committee may decide to meet on Monday. When's our deadline, Mr. Curry, to get that?
Tuesday.
Okay.
Wednesday technically, but I hate to wait to the last day, because then if something screws up, then you're done.
Okay. With REC not having any answers for us or anything new until most likely August, we may determine that a meeting in July is a bit premature and we won't have a whole lot to talk about. But we do want to understand what REC is going to do, get an idea of a timeline if they can give us one, because it could be years. And if so, then start looking at what other options we have short term, if any, until REC does get all of their fiber pulled.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. The Public Safety Committee meets on Tuesday, the 28th of this month.
Madam Chair, I failed to mention a really important thing. I believe it was a week ago Saturday, Gene Lillard led a dedication of 2 benches on the County Park tennis courts in memory of Fanning Baumgartner and also in memory of Dennis Fairbrother, both of whom were very active, I learned, in the local tennis community. And it was a very touching ceremony where the Fairbrother and Baumgartner families came out en masse. And I know Miss Bruce was there along with Miss Ralph and other local officials. It was a very nice event.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Are there any other updates? All right, that takes us to the treasurer's report. Mr. Curry.
I want to say one thing very importantly, that this is not a final accounting of the fiscal year. It does bear the date of June 30th, but it's not a final accounting. There are plenty of invoices and revenues that will still, expenditures and revenues that will be accrued back to FY20 because they're for services that were rendered or cash due as a result of FY20. So don't confuse these reports to be a proxy for the end of year audit. And other than that, I'll just throw up the cash chart that we talked about earlier, and it does have a peculiar tale in this June, and that is largely due to the CARES Act money being in our bank account, which another one of the rules is if you were to put it in its own account, then you must use the interest on CARES Act eligible expenditures. However, if you put it into your general fund account and use it just for general cash, you don't have to track the interest. That's what we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Were there any questions from the board? All right.
Mr. Curry, I mean, I might have asked this recently when we met, but remind me. So taking out the CARES Act money and then looking at our improved cash position compared to this time last year, I mean, in your judgment, based on your analysis, what would explain our better position?
And I think it's a combination both of revenue exceeding forecast in some areas and expenditures being low. That'll bear out with the audit. You can see revenues are very strong in many areas, including real estate and personal property collection. And there are large misses in others, but those others, when you trace them to ground, those are grants that didn't follow through because the expenditure didn't follow through. So there's a miss on the revenue and the expenditure side. We try to be, the board, on advice of myself and Ms. Nick, fairly conservative when we're forecasting revenues. Not as conservative as we were in FY21, right. But we don't want to have a miss on revenue. So that the budget should be set up to make sure that we are end the year in a positive position. Yep. If we don't, we have some issues. So all in all, it's a good story.
That's great.
Takes us to item J3, the review of legal matters.
I don't know if there's anything in particular. The information is updated in the packet with updates for each of the particular items. Happy to answer any questions.
Guess the one thing on the agenda or coming up is court date for Bragg 1 for attorney's fees on August 24th.
Yeah, Capielli is actually tomorrow.
Oh, very good.
They've asked for a continuance. I'm not sure how that's going to go.
Thank you. Update on county administrator activities.
I went ahead and just attached a little memo like I've done the last few meetings. I don't want to delay this meeting any longer. I think I've informed the board generally what's been going on. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now or at any other time. The public can review this at their leisure.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. I would say the same for the next 4 reports, the building, zoning administrator, VDOT, and Comcast information. Is there anything in particular you wanted to call out on any of those items?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions on any of those items?
Mr. Curry, thank you for all you did to bring the compactors online according to the schedule set earlier in the year. How's it looking so far?
There were growing pains here and there. We'll continue to make some improvements on traffic routing and and operations as we go forward. The next big job there is dealing with the 2 big pits, and that's probably going to be an August project. So you'll be hearing from me on that because the funds that the board appropriated for 20, those are vanished, right? So I'll come back to you and ask you to reappropriate what we didn't spend in 20 into 21 so we can get that work done.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Any other questions? All right, that takes us to item K1, matters presented by the board. Does anybody have things they'd like to bring forward?
Madam Chair, if you could just indulge me for a moment. Many people know that I had an incident in my home on May 29th, and I haven't really had a chance to state this publicly, but I want to thank Sheriff Compton, Captain Jim Jones, Lieutenant Janie Jenkins, Deputy Robbie Fincham, and all the dispatchers and deputies who assisted my family on that day. I also want to thank Mr. Goff for discussing with me some of the circumstances surrounding this incident, the individual who showed up on my property under very odd circumstances. So I think we always like to say we appreciate all the sheriff does, or the sheriff and her deputies do, but until something like that happens to your family at 9:30 in the morning on a sunny Friday, I don't think you really appreciate it until that moment. So I just want to state for the public record how grateful my family and I are to the entire Sheriff's Department for their help on that day.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Does anybody else have any items for discussion? I do have a few things. I don't want to interrupt somebody else if they'd like to speak first, but there are a few things that I have had on my mind and that I know other folks have heard about in their district. 2 of them are items that I believe will need referral to the Planning Commission, and we can maybe address them as new business next month. One is increase in the family division ordinance to allow families to further divide their properties for additional family members to be able to live in the county. I believe when the 5 was established in the 1980s, we're now more than a generation past that, and people would like for their children to live on the land with them. People are living longer. It might make sense to take a look at that and see if there's a recommendation from the Planning Commission to allow for further divisions for family purposes. So I just would look for feedback from my board members on that. The other thing that was brought to me is something that's come up in the ordinance and that I received feedback from folks in my district on, which was there was an event at Eldon Farm last weekend that drew 500 people, and people that live in that neighborhood had that event in their neighborhood, and they also had the John Jackson Festival last year at Eldon Farm. And so what is happening is that nonprofits are pulling event permits as we allow in the ordinance, which was originally allowed for fire and rescue companies, and using the nonprofits are facilitating the pulling of the permit instead of the properties applying for a special exception, which would then come before this board and the Planning Commission as well, and be subject to that process. And so, the main thing I heard from folks that live in that neighborhood is that, Mr. Fletcher applied for a special exception and went through the process and ultimately was denied. But yet there's another property in the neighborhood that didn't engage the process at all and yet is holding events on site. So I think there's an unintended loophole in the ordinance, and I'm not sure how much or if or when to close it, but I do think this is something that we should take a look at and put on as new business for our next meeting and consider referring to the Planning Commission for review.
So the difference between, Mr. Fletcher's application is that was, numerous events and, no limit on the whatever. And these other times are like a one-time deal only, and so it comes and goes. And so there is a difference. I don't disagree that we need to look at it.
Right. Well, it's a by right use if you have a nonprofit that's sponsoring it. So, I think that's what I'm intending, is that you make it very specific that either this nonprofit can use it once a year, or it can only happen once a year per property. But I don't think it was intended to be,
Well, it's not every weekend, that's for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and then by the same token, if somebody has a family wedding on their property, they should be allowed to have a family wedding.
right, that's their field party.
Right, exactly. There's that. And then in terms of the family divisions, that is worth looking at. What we have currently, does occasionally get abused, but that's, in my opinion, not that big a deal, because that's our way of developing in an extremely slow rate.
Correct.
So when that family member moves or dies off, they can still sell that 2-acre parcel, and that beats the heck out of, revamping the entire zoning system that would open it up to a lot of development. So it's got a inadvertent benefit to the county over the long run. So it is worth looking at.
I think it would allow for a small amount of controlled growth within a framework that has a precedent in the county.
And so when we initiated the zoning ordinance to impede development, that was the main protest, that the people wanted to have a place for their kids to live, and it does satisfy that, or their parents, or their grandchildren or grandparents. And so it has been very beneficial, and a lot of families have utilized it, and they're still there.
Yeah, I know, and I know people really appreciate it, and the family apartment is another good option. Of course, that restricts your square footage and how close you have to be to the other dwelling on the lot. So I think that this family subdivision is worth revisiting. It seems like there's a consensus to do that, so we'll look at that more thoroughly next month.
Appreciate you raising it.
And thank you, Mr. Frazier. Did you have anything for matters presented by the board?
No.
Thank you very much. All right, well, that takes us to, if nobody else has anything, that takes us to our closed meeting item for today. L1, the closed meeting for the county administrator performance evaluation. And there's a resolution in the packet. Mr. Goff, I believe the request is generally for you to stay with us as we work through this process, is what we did last year, and everyone was comfortable with that. Are you willing to stay for this again?
You want to stay for the entire thing, or just the go-in session?
I think they want somebody to be there to make sure that they're stay on point for a closed meeting if I'm not going to be in there as a Foia officer.
Correct. That was what we worked through last year. So if everyone's okay, I'll go ahead and make the motion to conduct a closed meeting. I move that the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors conduct a closed meeting in accordance with 2.2-3711A of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussion and consideration of the performance of specific employees of any public body, 2.2-3711A1. The subject matter of the closed meeting will be performance evaluation for the county administrator per section 15 of his employment agreement. And that is the motion as it is presented in the packet. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
And I also. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for hanging in so long, everyone.
Yes.